Chapter 2438 Floating Corpses. Chapter 2438 Floating Corpses. He was truly seeking death, someone mused. How so? Someone beside them asked. Don't you know? He's Ling Han, the person replied. Ling Han? Gasp! That Ling Han? The cultivators in the surroundings finally came to their senses. They had all heard the rumor before 3 heavenly venerates had done battle, and the trigger was none other than a youth called Ling Han. No wonder he was so powerful. As someone who could interact with heavenly venerates, how could he not be powerful? Ling Han ignored their reactions. He grabbed the red wolf's corpse and tossed it into the sea. Those who attacked others needed to be prepared for being killed instead. No one dared to snatch this corpse. The ill fate of the red wolf was already warning enough. Ling Han and the 3 women jumped onto the corpse of the wolf. This corpse was big enough, measuring 9 meters in length. Standing on top of it, they didn't feel squished at all. With a casual wave, Ling Han sent a burst of energy at the sea, triggering a wave and carrying the wolf ship forward. Let's test out the might of the seawater first, he said. They would very likely have to battle on the sea, so he had to figure out whether he could touch the seawater or not. Moreover, he had to determine how much he could interact with, if at all. Ling Han carefully stuck a finger into the seawater. An aura of death instantly surged toward him, yearning to exterminate his vitality, sending him into an eternal slumber. Ling Han humphed as he unleashed his celestial King Tier might, instantly stopping the aura of death. This aura of death was extremely powerful, though it was still a fair way off reaching the celestial King Tier. Ascending origin tier elites would be unable to block it, but pseudo-celestial kings could face it without fear. Ling Han nodded in his mind. His physique was astonishing, and he was also brimming with vitality. Thus, he could easily block the infiltration of this deadly aura. However, when he raised his hand, he saw that his palm was filled with a gray matter. This greatly affected the power of his regulation attacks. But my body art isn't affected, Ling Han said with a smile. This aura of death was similar to the regulation of darkness. However, the celestial realm most likely didn't have the regulation of darkness. This matter was slightly uncanny, but it was definitely something on the level of regulations. Thus, this was one regulation acting upon another. It didn't affect his body art at all. If I have to battle on the seas, I'll actually enjoy an advantage, Ling Han said. This sea possessed a mysterious power that stopped everyone from flying. Even with his celestial King Tier power, Ling Han was also subject to this restriction. Thus, if they did battle on the seas, even celestial kings would have to tread on the seawater. As such, their strength would definitely be detrimentally affected. This seems like a battlefield that's tailor-made for me. The Empress and the others also tested their reaction to the seawater. They could also resist the aura of death, yet they would need to exhaust a great amount of energy to do so. This was equivalent to slashing their battle prowess. No worry! Let's head off! Ling Han pushed with his palm again, causing the wolf ship to immediately speed up, cruising into the depths of the sea. Boom! A towering wave crashed over, measuring over 300 meters in height. Ling Han stood with sword in hand at the front of the wolf ship. After gathering power for a short while, he unsheathed his sword and unleashed a powerful burst of sword chi. Like a wrathful divine dragon, the burst of sword chi roared toward the gigantic wave. Pung! The two collided, and the wave was violently obliterated. Hua! Water splashed down, streaking past Ling Han's body. However, not a single drop hit him. Ling Han was brimming with energy, and he didn't need the 3 women to help him at all. He could stand here until the end of time. After several hours, the shore behind them had already vanished on the horizon. Meanwhile, the sea also became much more peaceful and calm. The celestial path also experienced cycles of day and night, and right now, the sun was setting in the west. It was as if a giant fireball were hovering above the sea, fiery red in color and strangely large. However, a cycle of day and night would take 3 days in the celestial path. Thus, The setting sun continued to linger in the sky for a long time. Huh! Something's drifting over in front of us, Ling Han suddenly said. The three women all stood up to gaze ahead, only to see that there was indeed some foreign matter drifting toward them. It bobbled up and down in the water. It's a person, the Empress said. Ling Han looked carefully, and he said, It's the person who set off before us. They had personally witnessed this person jumping onto a corpse and setting off into the sea. Right now, Ling Han could say with certainty that this was the same person. At this moment, he had most likely become a corpse. After all, Ling Han didn't believe that he could endure the aura of death in the sea for so long. Ling Han pushed with his palms again, steering toward the corpse. They drew closer and closer before colliding together. A wave swept over, turning the corpse around and causing its belly to face the top. Sure enough, it was that person. Being able to arrive here is an indication that he was powerful enough to suppress the waves. However, now that he's died, Ling Han paused for a moment. That signifies other dangers in the sea. The Empress continued. Be careful, Bewitching Maiden Rose said. Even though the four of them were powerful, there were many beings in the world that were even more powerful than them. This was especially the case in unknown environments such as this. They needed to be extremely wary and careful. All of a sudden, Ling Han was overcome with a sense of indescribable danger. It was as if someone had stabbed a needle between his brows, causing intense piercing pain. He immediately channeled his power, with his eyes becoming intense and his sword ready to attack. Meanwhile, the Empress and the others had already formed a flawless tacit understanding with Ling Han. They immediately entered a defensive stance, not needing his warning at all. However, where was this danger coming from? At this moment, the corpse suddenly opened its eyes. This was extremely harrowing. A dead person had suddenly opened their eyes, and they more so didn't possess any pupils at all. Their eyes were a deathly white. Fuck! Cold sweat instantly formed on the backs of Ling Han and the others. It wasn't that they hadn't seen dead people or sinister beings before. Rather, it was that the aura emanating from this corpse was far too eerie and cold. It was definitely at the celestial king tier. The corpse raised its head and suddenly opened its mouth, revealing a row of razor-sharp teeth. It leaped up to gnash at Ling Han. Humans definitely didn't possess such razor-sharp teeth. Each tooth was like a piercing spear, and it appeared as uncanny as could be. How pretentious! After locating the source of the danger, Ling Han surprisingly became calmer instead. He clenched his right fist and threw a punch at the corpse. The corpse didn't dodge, and it instead widened its mouth, aiming to bite Ling Han's fist. You want to see whether my fist is harder or your teeth are stronger? Ling Han mused. He gladly accepted this challenge, resolutely following through with his punch. Crack! The corpse forcefully closed its mouth, biting down on Ling Han's wrist. Ling Han cracked a grin. He unleashed the power of his punch, and the teeth of the corpse were completely unable to withstand this might. Pun! His punch directly struck the corpse's throat. The corpse shuddered violently, and it was as if its eyes were about to pop out. However, it continued to hold on to Ling Han's wrist, obstructing his movements. It then reached over with its arms to grab him. Just how long had passed? However, its fingers had already become extremely long and sharp, and it was as if they were steel swords. I'm telling you, you're dreaming, Ling Han said with a shake of his right arm. Crack, crack, crack. The teeth of the corpse shattered, and with a flick of his arm, the corpse was sent flying. Plop! The corpse landed back in the ocean, sending a splash of water into the air. After just an instant, the surface of the sea was disturbed again, with the corpse resurfacing and attacking Ling Han and the others with countless drops of water. Ling Han slashed down with his sword. 1. The drops of water instantly froze in the air. After a brief moment, they then shot back at an even quicker speed. Poo pu pu. The corpse was instantly riddled with wounds, yet it didn't shed a single drop of blood. Chapter 2439 Watervine. Chapter 2439 Watervine. Ling Han threw another punch. Pun! His strike landed on the chest of the corpse, its wild power causing the ribs of the corpse to instantly shatter, blowing a hole through its back. This corpse had already been drained of its blood. Thus, even though its body was torn apart, all that flowed out was seawater and some kind of unknown gray matter. Pun! The corpse was blasted into the sea again. This time, however, it didn't resurface. Ling Han pondered for a moment before saying, "Its vitality index is around 4,700. This was far inferior to the four of them. In fact, even Bewitching Maiden Ro had a vitality index of 4,700. Thus, they hadn't needed to fear that corpse at all. However, this situation was only specific to them. One had to realize that ordinary cultivators at the peak stage of the ascending origin tier only had a vitality index of around 4,300. Even monarch stars would only have a vitality index of around 4,500. From this, it was clear just how powerful a vitality index of 4,700 was. If one weren't a pseudo-celestial king, they would need to ingest some crimson demonic earth if they wanted to rival these corpses. Of course, Ling Han was a completely different matter. After all, only one such freak existed in the countless dimensions and after countless epochs. Ling Han wore a solemn expression. Even though the corpse hadn't been threatening, how had it been formed? That person hadn't appeared to be too powerful while alive, with his vitality index back then hovering around 4,300 at most. Perhaps 4,400. There had been a limit to his power. There was a terrifying secret hidden in this sea. Splash! There was a splash of water as the corpse suddenly resurfaced before them. This time, it had finally undergone some transformations. There was a gray vine wrapped around its spine, and it was as if it were injecting something into the corpse. This was most likely the vine of some water grass. It was tubular in form, and there was some kind of indescribable fluid coursing through its length. It was incredibly long, and it had most probably slithered out from the depths of the sea. 1. The corpse opened its eyes again. This time, there was a film of hazy gray on its deathly white eyes. "So this is how the undead sea got its name," Ling Han said. "Even though the living beings who fell into the sea would be killed, they would be revived through some strange method. Moreover, they couldn't be killed no matter what. In a sense, they were undead." "Let Neo deal with it," Huo said with excitement. She loved this kind of fresh challenge. Pun! She dashed forward, with her feet treading atop the seawater. Even though the regulations here were strange, she could still stay above the water for a very long time. The young lady charged her fist before swinging it at the corpse. The water vine twisted like a whip, swinging the corpse at Huo. "Neo isn't afraid!" Huo shouted. The power of regulations gathered on her fist as it blasted toward the corpse. Pun pun pun! The corpse continued to exchange blows with Huo. However, it didn't use its fists or legs. Instead, it used its entire body as a weapon. In reality, the water vine was the hand that was brandishing a weapon. Meanwhile, the weapon was the entire corpse. Ling Han nodded and said, "It's the plants in the sea that are reviving the corpses. Moreover, this person was most likely killed by something from the sea as well. But this isn't certain. Perhaps the plants in the sea took control of the corpse that he had been riding on, using it to toss him into the sea before killing him." Huh! Then there should be another corpse. Just as he said this, splash! Another corpse dashed out from the water, with its spine also entangled with a vine. It radiated with a malevolent aura as it charged at Huo. These corpses are quite smart. They understand the notion of killing one enemy instead of only wounding 5. Ling Han remarked. Bewitching Maiden Ro covered her mouth and chuckled. "Do you really think everyone is as dumb as you?" Ling Han laughed as he charged forward with his sword. However, his target wasn't the two corpses. Instead, it was the water vines. Plop! He directly dived into the sea. Seawater enveloped him, instantly surrounding him with an overwhelming aura of death that wanted to infiltrate his body and corrode his very being. However, Ling Han was unafraid as he channeled his power, forcefully clearing his surroundings. This was a taxing task, and it was as if the entire sea had become his enemy, yearning to crush him into smithereens. Being on the sea and being in the sea were two completely different notions. After some calculations, Ling Han told himself that he could only maintain this state for 2 hours at most. Otherwise, even he would become exhausted. Swoosh! A water vine suddenly shot over from some unknown location in the depths of the sea, aiming to entangle Ling Han. Ling Han met this attack with his sword, with gleams of ice-cold light accompanying a murderous aura that soared into the sky. The water vine arrived, yet it was viciously struck by his sword. However, Ling Han felt as if he had struck a piece of divine metal. The vine was frighteningly tough. However, it wasn't genuine divine metal, after all. Ling Han unleashed his full power, upon which the divine demon sword also unleashed a devastating murderous aura. With a crack, the water vine was forcefully cut into two. Gray matter instantly surged into the sea from this wound, and it was as if the water vine were bleeding. The surroundings were instantly dyed gray. Ling Han immediately felt an increase in the concentration of the aura of death. It was as if tens of millions of thin needles were stabbing at his back, yearning to shatter his defenses. Does the aura of death in the sea come from these water vines? Or have these water vines been transformed by the aura of death in the sea? Ling Han didn't have time to ponder this as the severed vine lashed at him again. The water vine was unbelievably long, so the loss of 6 or so meters of it that Ling Han had severed barely affected it at all. However, Ling Han replied with a cold chuckle. So what if this water vine was long? He would continue to cut it until there was nothing left to be cut. The water vine attacked him several times, yet it was ruthlessly slashed off by him each time. In the end, it stopped this act of self-harm, rapidly shrinking back into the depths of the sea. It's given up just like that. However, Ling Han's pupils instantly contracted. He looked down, only to see 17 dark objects shooting over from below. Looking carefully, these were 17 separate water vines. It even knows to call friends? Ling Han didn't dare to be careless. If he were on the surface of the ground, he wouldn't be afraid even if he were attacked by 170 water vines, much less 17. However, he was in the sea, where he needed to expend a great deal of energy resisting the pressure of the water. Thus, his battle prowess had naturally fallen by a significant amount. With a kick of his feet, he swam toward the surface of the sea. Battling down here would be far too disadvantageous for him. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 17 water vines shot toward his feet. They were surprisingly intelligent, and they understood that they could achieve easy victory if they dragged Ling Han to the bottom of the sea. Ling Han swung his sword, sending a burst of razor-sharp sword chi toward the water vines. Meanwhile, he took advantage of the backward momentum to rapidly rise to the surface of the sea. Shwa! The sword chi swept over. However, the 17 water vines performed an astonishing action. They surprisingly entangled together, forming a giant fist to punch at the sword chi. Pun! The sword light arrived, yet it only managed to leave a shallow mark on the water vines. The water vines then rapidly disentangled before continuing to shoot toward Ling Han. With a crash, Ling Han broke through the surface of the sea. He stood atop it, and the pressure around him instantly vanished. Right now, he only needed to resist the peculiar power of regulations in this region, preventing himself from sinking. Splash, splash, splash. The 17 water vines shot out from the water at almost the exact same time. They then attacked Ling Han from different directions. Ling Han was unafraid as he battled these water vines with his divine demon sword. These water vines were far more powerful than the corpses, yet their vitality index was only around 4,800. Even though he was facing them alone, Ling Han was still clearly relaxed and unfazed. He continued to swing his sword, with more and more severed vines landing in the sea, dyeing the water gray and filling it with an aura of death. Whoosh! The water vines suddenly retreated in unison, including the 2 corpse-wielding vines that had been battling against Huo. They shrunk back into the sea together. Chapter 2440 Island of Prodigies. Chapter 2440 Island of Prodigies. The water vines retreated. Not only had the water vines retreated, but they had even taken the two corpses with them. Peace and normality returned. It was as if this were a tranquil afternoon where the warm sun shone down to a carefree tune. However, Ling Han didn't dare to let his guard down. He refused to believe that these water vines would give up so easily. Not good! With a frown, he instantly leaped into the sea. Plop! He looked down, only to see 19 water vines silently sneaking over, targeting their ship. These water vines were truly quite intelligent. They understood the concept of killing the horse before killing its rider. Even though they were discovered, they had still achieved victory. They had forced Ling Han to battle in the sea. Ling Han's gaze was baleful, and he said with his divine sense, "Since you insist, don't blame me for being ruthless." He retrieved the heaven and earth origin stars. This was a devastating weapon that could threaten the lives of even low-level celestial kings. Sure enough, the 19 water vines faltered upon seeing this. It was as if they understood the danger of this item. They didn't dare to approach. However, they didn't retreat either. Instead, they came to a stop in the distance, and it was as if they were staring at Ling Han with cold gazes. This wasn't good news. After all, Ling Han could only stay in the sea for a limited amount of time. However, if these water vines didn't retreat, he couldn't return to the ship either. He had to stand guard here. This put him on the back foot. Ling Han decided to sheath his sword. With one hand, he grabbed the fur of the wolf corpse to carry himself forward, and with his other hand, he held the heaven and earth origin stars to threaten the water vines. The ship continued to move. It was being furiously pushed forward by the three women. Meanwhile, Ling Han's stamina also continued to rapidly drain. This sea was incredibly terrifying. In fact, it could even be treated as a second heaven celestial king. By entering the sea, Ling Han was essentially facing the pressure exerted by such a celestial king. Even though the sea wasn't unleashing its full strength, this pressure was rushing at Ling Han from all possible directions. There was no reprieve anywhere. Ling Han had no option but to expend a huge amount of his energy to resist this pressure, increasing his expenditure. Of course, replenishing his energy was also easy. He simply needed to eat some food and rest for a while. Doing so would definitely help him recover. However, did Ling Han have any time to recover? 1 hour quickly passed by. At this moment, Ling Han was already starting to feel some strain. He had estimated that he could stay in the sea for around 2 hours. However, that was the absolute limit. Starting from the 1 hour mark, he was already starting to feel stretched. This feeling would only worsen, all the way until he was unable to endure it. Time continued to creep by. Cold sweat started to form on Ling Han's forehead. At this moment, he couldn't help but cherish the Black Tower. However, he immediately reminded himself that precious tools were only assistive tools. There would eventually come the day when his strength surpassed the Black Tower. If he became overly reliant on it, what would he do then? Thus, he needed to get used to life without the Black Tower. Ling Han gritted his teeth and endured. He had already made up his mind. If he truly became exhausted, he would extract some power from the Dimension Scroll. That would replenish some of his energy. Moreover, the formation of a heavenly venerate tribulation would also very likely scare away these water vines. The time approached 2 hours, and cold sweat was already pouring down Ling Han's forehead. His hand that held the heaven and earth origin stars was also trembling slightly. The water vines clearly noticed this as well, and they all started to become restless. They were itching to make a move. Right at this moment, the Empress suddenly transmitted a message with her divine sense saying, "Hold on for a little longer. There's an island up ahead." Ling Han was overjoyed. This was truly like the arrival of rain in a drought-stricken land. There couldn't be better news. He could sense the speed of the ship increasing, and he could also make out a fuzzy and ginormous dark figure before him. This was most likely the portion of the island that rested below the water. However, seeing the island was only one matter. Sailing there would still take a significant amount of time. Ling Han could only grit his teeth and endure. Crack! His bones creaked and cracked, which was due to the immense pressure of the sea. His entire body ached, and it was as if his bones were about to explode. However, the island drew closer and closer. Perhaps they were only 15 minutes away from it. The water vines seemingly saw this as well, and they couldn't help but become agitated. They started to sway around, and it was as if they could barely hold themselves back from attacking. However, they were extremely fearful of the heaven and earth origin stars, so they continued to hold back from attacking. Pun! Ling Han felt the ship shudder, and he could already see the black stone before him. He immediately dashed up. Splash! He broke through to the surface, and he immediately collected the wolf corpse as he did so. They would still need it to leave the island. The three women had already ascended the island. Ling Han followed behind them, and he almost fell on his behind. He had never felt so tired before. Splash! The 19 water vines also shot out from the water. They were arched like snakes, and it was as if they were staring at Ling Han and his companions. They didn't attack, nor did they retreat. They simply hovered there as if they were guards. Let's go! The Empress and the others carried Ling Han as they quickly left the shore. Just then, they had been fully focused on steering the ship, so they hadn't had the time to carefully observe the island. Only now did they have a chance to do so. This was an island that was filled with a primordial aura. It measured 30 kilometers or so in diameter, and it couldn't be considered as a big island. Lush green vegetation covered the island, and the trees towered 300 meters into the air. Their leaves were healthy and large, blocking out much of the sun. As a result, the ground was always moist and dark. Ling Han retrieved some food and voraciously devoured it. The best way to replenish energy was to eat highly nutritious foods. Thus, he was either eating the meat of high-level immortal beasts, or chowing down on celestial medicines. His energy and stamina were rapidly replenished. The island wasn't large, so with their speed, they arrived at the center in no time at all. This was also the highest point on the island. When they walked out of the dense forest, they felt as if everything had suddenly become open and clear. There was a patch of empty land before them. This land was flat, and there were surprisingly a few people sitting there. Ji Wuming, Jiaolan, Shichanzi, the Rain Emperor. Ling Han immediately recognized 4 of them. There were also 2 people who he didn't recognize. However, they were both brimming with vitality, and they were clearly powerful monarch stars. Ling Han! 4th brother! Upon seeing Ling Han, several of these people exclaimed in greeting. However, apart from the brotherly affection shown by the Rain Emperor, the rest of them all wore interesting expressions. This was especially the case with the 2 people whom Ling Han didn't know. They both wore slight scowls, and it was clear that they were filled with animosity. Ling Han stood still as he nodded at the Rain Emperor and replied, "Second brother!" The Rain Emperor walked over, and Ling Han asked with his divine sense, "What's going on?" "I was pursued by several water vines, and I was fortunate enough to come across this island where I can rest for a while," the Rain Emperor replied with his divine sense. He paused for a moment before continuing, "It's the same for everyone else." Ling Han frowned and said, "In other words, we've all been trapped here." The Rain Emperor nodded and replied, "I tried to set off again, but no matter where I leave from, I'll always encounter those water vines." Ling Han was even more astonished. "But we weren't attacked by the water vines before we arrived on the island. Combined with your situation, it seems like these water vines are purposefully herding us onto this island." The Rain Emperor also frowned upon hearing this. If the water vines were truly herding them onto this island, then it was clear that this island wasn't a safe place, either. "Brother Ji, what do you say?" Ling Han asked as he looked toward Ji Wuming. This wasn't the first time that Ji Wuming had entered the celestial path. If someone understood the current situation, it would definitely be Ji Wuming. Chapter 2441 Son of Sealed Emotion Heavenly Venerable. Chapter 2441 Son of Sealed Emotion Heavenly Venerable. Ji Wuming glanced at Ling Han before shaking his head and replying, "What if I told you that the severing mundane tier, dividing soul tier, celestial path, and what not all didn't exist before. These notions only appeared after the transformation of heaven and earth. How would you react? Ling Han's mouth was slightly agape, and he said in astonishment, I'll probably react like this. Ji Wuming nodded and said, A long, long time ago, the celestial path didn't exist. In other words, in Ji Wuming's previous life, that was when he was the Nine Lights ancient Buddha, there was no need to traverse the celestial path to become a celestial king. Instead, they used another method to form their celestial seed. Ling Han pondered over this. A while ago, he had discovered a damaged celestial tool on the celestial path. It had been left by the karmic life Heavenly Venerable's mother. Combining this discovery with Ji Wuming's words, it could be proved that the celestial path had once been a part of the celestial realm. After the transformation of heaven and earth, this region had broken off from the celestial realm and transformed into a mystery realm. Afterward, ascending origin tier elites who wanted to become celestial kings all needed to enter this mystery realm to form a celestial seed. Ling Han mulled over this for a moment before saying, It seems like heaven and earth is also playing a game of chess. In reality, heaven and earth were the most powerful. Regardless of how one cultivated, they couldn't surpass the power of heaven and earth. Take, for example, the sealed emotion Heavenly Venerable and the others. Their footsteps could only halt here. If they wanted to advance further, they would need the celestial realm to collapse. In this realm, everyone was subject to the suppression of heaven and earth. Right now, there was an intense battle between the celestial realm and the foreign realm. The heaven and earth of the celestial realm was naturally unwilling to collapse, yet it couldn't directly interfere with the battle. Thus, it made some other arrangements, such as accelerating the appearance of some rare opportunities. By doing so, it could nurture an increasing number of prodigies who could resist the invasion of the foreign realm. However, there was also another possibility. Perhaps heaven and earth had already arranged things a long time ago. In fact, it might have arranged things several epochs ago, when the celestial path had first appeared. Heaven and earth! What in the world does it want to do? Ling Han! There was a loud roar as a handsome man strode over. His gait was like that of a dragon and a tiger, and he was like a paramount ruler as he walked over. A golden glow rose from his body, and it was as if people could only bow down before him. Even though Ling Han had yet to fully recover, he wasn't afraid of this person at all. He hadn't exhausted his power of regulations, so his battle prowess was still as fearsome as could be. He remained silent as he looked toward the man. I'm Dongfang Rue, the young man announced. His words surprisingly transformed into all kinds of immortal beast symbols, and this was truly an astonishing sight to behold. Oh, okay, Ling Han replied with a nod. He then turned to Ji Wuming and continued, Brother Ji, what do you say? He completely ignored Dongfang Rue. Ling Han! Dongfang Rue roared in anger. Boom! The golden glow around him trembled, and he was much like a sun god that was about to erupt. Jialan stepped forward and said, Brother Dongfang, please calm down. Her figure was shapely, and her appearance was also exquisite. She was extremely attractive. This island is filled with unknown dangers, so this is a time for cooperation and understanding, Shi Chanzi also said. Dongfang Rui was obstructed, and he didn't use force on Jialan. Instead, he looked at Ling Han with a cold expression and said, I've heard many people speak about your arrogance lately. Sure enough, they were speaking the truth. Ling Han raised his brow and said, You're dissatisfied? Since this person was filled with hostility, was there any need for him to be respectful? Ha! Ha! Dongfang Rui roared with contemptuous laughter. When I was challenging the world, your ancestors were probably still languishing in a hole. Ling Han instantly came to a realization. Oh, are you another descendant of some ninth heaven celestial king? Did they seal you for several epochs, but forget to seal your toxic mouth for a while longer? This? Dongfang Rui almost exploded in rage. How was this person so toxic? His black hair stood on ends, and the golden glow around him transformed into a divine broadsword that pointed at Ling Han. It was ready to strike at any moment. He was a monarch star, and he had more so become a pseudo-celestial king now. His vitality index was roughly around 4,800, so his might would naturally be astonishing. However, he suddenly suppressed his anger, and said in a solemn voice, "My father, is the sealed emotion heavenly venerable?" Ling Han was astonished. "The sealed D**CK heavenly venerable actually has a son?" He looked Dongfang up and down, and said, "Are you sure you're not your neighbor's son?" Dongfang was unable to hold back any longer. With a bellow, he charged at Ling Han with no regard for anything else. The golden glow around him pulsated, and it was as if it were breathing out golden sword after golden sword. This was an astounding scene. This was as expected of a monarch star who had ruled during his time. He was unbelievably powerful. However, Ling Han was unafraid. He had already surpassed the level of monarch star, and his evolution index had more so risen to 11. Even monarch stars could only gaze up at him. Without using his body art, and only relying on his power of regulations, he could already reach a vitality index of 4,900. This would provide him with a crushing advantage. He pressed forward with his palm, instantly trapping Dongfang. All of Dongfang's struggles were futile. There was a vitality index gap of 100 between them, and this was like the gulf between the Emperor tier and the Monarch tier. Ling Han stepped forward, and he just was about to swing his palm at Dongfang's face. "Humph!" Dongfang's eyes instantly narrowed in anger. Whoosh! A golden sword leaped out from between his brows, instantly unleashing a formidable might. Celestial Tool! The golden sword instantly shattered Ling Han's spatial restriction, allowing Dongfang to break free. With a furious roar, he slashed the sword down at Ling Han. He was the son of a heavenly venerate, so possessing a celestial tool was as obvious as could be. However, after stealing a few glances at the sword, Ling Han was astonished by what he discovered. This wasn't a celestial tool. This golden sword had indeed been forged from divine metal. However, its might was only equivalent to that of the divine demon sword. It was only at the ascending origin tier. It was clear that Dongfang was filled with ambition. He didn't want to be protected by his father, and he wanted to forge a celestial tool for himself. Only so could he unleash the full might of the celestial tool. Ling Han laughed loudly as he unsheathed his divine demon sword. Boom! The two of them exchanged a strike. Like before, Dongfang was blasted back again. He was deeply astonished. He hadn't imagined that Ling Han also possessed a celestial tool. Moreover, this celestial tool was the same as his. Ling Han was also trying to forge his own celestial tool. Dongfang's disadvantage was too great, so it was futile regardless of how prodigious he was. He couldn't turn the tables, and he could only defend with all his might. This was a completely one-sided battle. Jialan, Shichanzi, and the other young man were all stunned. They knew that Ling Han was powerful, but they definitely hadn't imagined that he was this powerful. He could crush those at the same cultivation level. One had to realize that they were all monarch stars. In other words, there was no extra room to advance. Right now, however, Ling Han was clearly more powerful than them. How was this possible? Only Ji Wuming's eyes lit up. He was filled with fighting spirit. Piss off! He immediately charged forward. Pun! He kicked Dongfang aside, and a divine sword shot out from above his head. It was also forged from ordinary divine metal. It wasn't a celestial tool. Ling Han had seen his other divine sword before, the one that had been forged into a celestial tool. This, however, was a divine tool. It was clear that those with great ambitions all refused to use the precious tools of others. Instead, they were intent on nurturing their own. Only so could they create something that suited them best. This was the case even if it were a precious tool forged in their previous life. They would throw it away on a whim. Since they had decided to reincarnate and recultivate, they would need to cleanly sever everything from their previous life. Sure enough, Ji Wuming was a person of great wisdom and great resolve. Ling Han's eyes also lit up. Dongfang had actually been kicked aside by Ji Wuming. Even though there had been an element of surprise, this was still a clear reflection that Ji Wuming was more powerful than Dongfang Rui. The opponent whom he held in the highest regard was none other than Ji Wuming. Seeing him become stronger, Ling Han couldn't help but feel delighted. "Come battle!" he said with loud laughter. With a loud roar, Ji Wuming charged over with his sword. A boundless, murderous aura soared into the air. In this life, he was much like a demon, completely abandoning the Buddhism that he had personally founded in his previous life. He was a master of death, of punishment, and of attacking. Chapter 2442 Rare Opponent. Chapter 2442 Rare Opponent. Ling Han battled against Ji Wuming. This wasn't their first battle, and it most likely wouldn't be their last either. Neither person went easy on the other. They both fought with their full strength, unleashing their full power. Going easy would be an act of humiliation toward their opponent. Meanwhile, Dongfang Rui bared his teeth on the side. Ji Wuming's kick had been extremely heavy, and he was still aching in pain even until now. This was a miserly pain that reached all the way to his bone. He wore a baleful expression as he glanced at Ji Wuming and then Ling Han. He boiled with killing intent. A single slumber had changed everything. He had once been an invincible monarch star, and it had been difficult to even find an opponent. Now, however, not only were there several monarch stars, but there were even ones who were more powerful than him. In the past, he had yearned for a powerful opponent. Now that he had found such opponents, however, he couldn't accept his inferiority. This was mainly because Ling Han and Ji Wuming were far too powerful. They were vastly more powerful than him, so much so that he couldn't even see a glimmer of hope. He had to exterminate such opponents. He tightened his grip on his sword, and he channeled his power to the peak state. If Ling Han and Ji Wuming both suffered heavy wounds, he would lash out and kill them without hesitation. At that time, he would immediately enter the heaven-forbidden state, pushing his battle prowess to the level of Celestial King. He would then kill them with a single stroke of his sword. The other youth glanced at Dongfang Rui, imperceptibly exchanging a glance with him. Dongfang Rui immediately understood his intention. The youth was saying, "Leave one for me." He gave a slight nod before turning his gaze to Ling Han. This was to signal that Ling Han was his. The other youth also gave a slight nod. He then locked his gaze on Ji Wuming. Dongfang Rui stopped focusing on Ji Wuming. He was completely confident in the other youth's ability. This was because his background was no weaker than his. In the past, he had also been invincible in his cultivation level. Similarly, he had also been sealed until recently, awaiting the great opportunity of this celestial path. He was called Xianrong, and he was the grandson of the Jiuwu Heavenly Venerate. At the same time, he was also the most powerful successor of the Jiuwu clan. Ling Han felt extremely delighted and satisfied at this moment. Ji Wuming was definitely a good opponent. If there were anyone else who could rival him, that would be Huai Jian from the foreign realm, regarded as the most powerful monarch star in history. However, Ling Han was still more powerful. This was because Ji Wuming's evolution index had yet to reach 11. It was only infinitesimally close to 11. Even though this was only a minuscule difference, it was this tiny difference that rendered Ji Wuming's battle prowess slightly weaker than Ling Han's. After battling for a long time, this gap would be magnified further and further. "Very well!" Ji Wuming didn't cower at all. With a roar, a mysterious wave emanated from his body, instantly elevating his battle prowess by a significant amount. Not only had he equaled Ling Han, but he had even surpassed Ling Han by a significant amount. Right now, Ji Wuming's strength was infinitesimally close to that of a celestial king. He hadn't ingested any crimson demonic earth, and he had instead entered some sort of mysterious state. This state allowed him to rival the power of celestial kings. Heaven-forbidden state. This was a state that even the heavens forbade. This was because celestial kings represented the will of heaven and earth. Thus, was for measly ascending origin tier cultivators to rival this not an act of provocation toward the heavens? Thus, it was naturally forbidden. After entering this state, Ji Wuming became even fiercer than before. His battle prowess rose by more than 100-fold. Because Ji Wuming had been a celestial king in his previous Lithia, most powerful ninth heaven celestial king, at that his mastery of regulations could almost surpass that of all celestial kings. When others reached the celestial king tier, they only enjoyed an increase in cultivation level. However, things were different for him. Upon reaching this level, he could better wield the power of regulations, therefore allowing his battle prowess to rise significantly. Ling Han was instantly pushed to his back foot. For other people, their cultivation speed would grow slower the higher that they advanced. They would need longer and longer to accustom themselves to each cultivation level. However, things were different for Ji Wuming. His cultivation speed would grow quicker the closer he came to becoming a celestial king. Moreover, he didn't need to familiarize himself with anything. He had already been the strongest celestial king in his previous life. Boom! 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 Ji Wuming was extremely domineering, and his black hair streaked through the wind as he brandished his sword, making him appear extremely handsome. However, his aura was like that of a demon, uncanny yet mesmerizing at the same time. Ling Han roared with laughter. He continued to wield his sword with his right hand, while he clenched his left hand into a fist. He then activated his body art and unleashed his self-founded fists of fury. This was a combination of regulations and body arts. Thus, it didn't matter even if he hadn't cultivated the heaven-forbidden state. These were two completely different powers. In fact, this was equivalent to the combined power of two pseudo-celestial kings, one with a vitality index of 4999, and the other with a vitality index of 4900. This was extremely terrifying. This allowed Ling Han's battle prowess to immediately jump to 5000. He was no weaker than Ji Wuming. They both unleashed their trump cards, yet neither side was able to defeat the other. Their strength was incredibly close. As they watched the battle between the two freaks, even Jiao Lan and the other monarch stars could only click their tongues in wonder. Too powerful! Even if they entered the heaven-forbidden state or ingested the crimson demonic earth, their battle prowess could only grow infinitesimally close to the celestial king tier. How could they possibly surpass this level? This was the restriction of heaven and earth. If one weren't a celestial king, they could only remain beneath the level of celestial king. However, these two people were defying the heavens. In fact, only by defying the heavens could one become a heavenly venerate. This was because heavenly venerates were born from defying the heavens. They didn't belong to heaven and earth, and they would even be targeted by heaven and earth. Perhaps, two heavenly venerates were going to appear in this generation? Jiao Lan and the others all wore envious expressions. However, they immediately told themselves that they also had a chance. The flawless celestial seed, one of perfection, and one that was nurtured from the essence of heaven and earth for several epochs. This celestial seed could provide them with a sliver of hope to advance to the heavenly venerable tier when ascending to the ninth heaven. I have to obtain this, they all thought to themselves. In order to obtain this flawless celestial seed, they would kill those beside them with no hesitation. Ling Han and Ji Wuming were still engaged in an intense battle. At this moment, their respective battle prowess had soared to around 5100. This was absolutely terrifying. Just the shock waves of their attacks alone could easily kill ascending origin tier elites. If the spectators weren't all pseudo-celestial kings, many of them would have definitely been killed. However, in a strange sight, the furious battle between the two pseudo-celestial kings failed to affect the grass and vegetation of the island. It was as if these plants were one with the island. If someone wanted to damage them, they would need to destroy the entire island. This was extremely uncanny. After all, the battle prowess of celestial kings was already great enough to easily shatter celestial bodies in the sky. As such, wouldn't destroying a small island be a simple task? This place was indeed strange. After battling for another 2 hours, Ling Han and Ji Wuming stopped attacking at almost the exact same time. Ha ha! The two of them exchanged a glance before bursting into hearty laughter. They both felt indescribably satisfied. It was rare to find such a worthy opponent. Ling Han had a feeling that he could become a heavenly venerate 10 times quicker with Ji Wuming around. A good opponent could provide him with endless motivation. Ji Wuming clearly felt the same as well. Thus, there was also fighting spirit and appreciation in his eyes as he gazed at Ling Han. Dongfang Rui and Xian Rong exchanged a glance, both wearing slight frowns. They hadn't expected that Ling Han and Ji Wuming would stop their battle so soon. They were far from wounding each other. As such, they had no chance to attack either. Ling Han glanced over and said, "Don't be rash, and don't seek death." He didn't attack them carelessly. This was because everyone had a final trump card advancing to the Celestial King tier. Not only would their battle prowess remain at the Celestial King tier, but it would even surge by a significant amount. Thus, unless one could succeed in launching a surprise attack, it was better not to waste their energy trying to kill others. Of course, Ling Han didn't need to give Dongfang Rui and Xian Rong face either. After all, could they become so enraged that they chose to advance to the Celestial King tier? Chapter 2443 Huo Furong. Chapter 2443 Huo Furong. Both Dongfang Rui and Xian Rong trembled in rage. Just when had they been treated like this before? However, they were indeed no match for Ling Han. Even if they teamed up and entered the heaven-forbidden state, they would still only be able to suppress Ling Han. Trying to kill him in the short time span provided by the heaven-forbidden state would be impossible. In any case, if they pushed their opponent too far, he could break through to the Celestial King tier. In other words, everyone was in possession of a deadly trump card. Thus, they wouldn't push things too far if they weren't confident. "Naive fool!" Dongfang Rui chided. "It's beneath me to speak drivel with you," Xian Rong also said in a cold voice. Ling Han gazed into the distance and said, "Brother Ji, have you noticed? All of the people forced onto this island are monarch stars. Only bewitching Maiden Ro was an exception. This was because she had come with Ling Han and the others." Ji Wuming nodded and replied, "If one isn't a monarch star, it's extremely difficult for them to make it here." However, Ling Han didn't agree with this statement, saying, "Even though I threatened the water vines that I encountered, if they had insisted on attacking, the outcome would have been hard to determine. He only possessed a limited number of heaven and earth origin stars, yet there had been a total of 19 water vines. If they had attacked no matter the cost, he could have indeed destroyed many of the water vines, but the party of 4 would have also been plunged into a perilous situation. At that time, they would have had no choice but to advance to the Celestial King tier. Otherwise, their only fate would have been death." Ling Han involuntarily took a sharp breath. The water vines hadn't considered this, had they? Was it because of this that the water vines left them with a sliver of hope? Was their aim simply to force them to this island? If this were true, then what kind of great dangers lay on this island? Ling Han voiced his concerns, causing everyone's expression to change. Even Dongfang Rui and Xian Rong were astonished. They weren't stupid, so they easily noticed the problem with just a little thought. What kind of dangers lay on this island? Perhaps this place is suppressed by heaven and earth, preventing us from advancing to the Celestial King tier? They immediately thought of this possibility. In fact, this was their greatest trump card. With their flawless celestial seed marks, and with their monarch star aptitude, once they advanced to the Celestial King tier, their battle prowess would directly soar to the second heaven. In other words, they could essentially wander around the celestial path as they pleased. They all tested this hypothesis. They slightly loosened the restriction on their cultivation. Dark clouds instantly gathered overhead, with thunder rumbling and lightning flashing. Strange. This place wasn't cut off from heaven and earth, so they weren't prevented from advancing to the Celestial King tier. Then what was wrong? Even though they were all monarch stars, they still couldn't make head nor tail of the situation. They were completely stumped. Perhaps they would be trapped here for 10,000 years. However, this didn't make sense. At that time, they would all choose to advance to the Celestial King tier. At the most, they would only face some slight imperfections. However, this was still acceptable. All of them possessed strong willpower, so there was no sense of fear or confusion among them. They simply waited on the island, calmly awaiting any changes. Several days passed, and another person arrived on the island. This was a young girl who looked to be around 12 or 13 years old. She was small and petite, though she was definitely no normal person. After all, could an ordinary person make it to this island by themselves? She was not only at the ascending origin tier, but she was also a monarch star. Of course, she was also a pseudo-celestial king already. Celestial Maiden Furong! Upon seeing this young girl, Dong Fengrui and Xian Rong surprisingly greeted her with respect. This was an extremely rare sight, especially for them. The young girl acted extremely senior as she cast a calm glance at Dong Fengrui and Xian Rong. She then nodded in acknowledgement. She swept her gaze around, and she didn't pay much attention to anyone. However, her eyes involuntarily lit up when she saw little Terror. "Doggy!" she exclaimed. She looked like a child who had seen a new toy. Her hard-kept image instantly shattered. Was she truly a super elite? Huo Furong! Ji Wuming's pupils contracted, and a rare expression of solemnness spread across his face. The young girl cocked her head to look at Ji Wuming. She bit her lips with her snow-white teeth as if pondering over something. After a brief moment she said, "Those who have seen me have all died. Only one person was an exception." She clapped her hands, and exclaimed in an innocent voice, "You're the Baldy Nine Lights!" Ling Han's heart jolted. This young girl looked innocent and adorable, but in reality, she was most likely a bringer of death. "Those who have seen me have all died." Just what did these words express? She definitely had a profound background. At the same time, she definitely possessed terrifying strength as well. It was because of this that both Dong Fengrui and Xian Rong, descendants of heavenly venerates, treated her in such a careful manner. They were afraid of offending this young girl. To say nothing else, Ji Wuming was definitely profoundly powerful in his previous life as well. However, judging by the young girl's tone, he had merely managed to survive after encountering her. Ji Wuming nodded and said, "Your memory is very good. If you can withstand 100 of my attacks, I won't kill you. This is the rule that I set," the young girl said. She was called Huo Furong. She looked Ji Wuming up and down, and continued, "You changed your appearance, and I almost failed to recognize you. You probably have the right to fight with me now. However, you'll only be able to block 1,000 strikes at most." She was brimming with confidence. Ling Han involuntarily welled up with fighting spirit. He stepped forward and asked, "What about me?" Huo Furong glanced at Ling Han, and her pupils involuntarily contracted. "I can't see through you." She paused for a moment before continuing, "You're very powerful. Not in terms of regulations, but in terms of something else." Ling Han was astonished upon hearing this. This young girl was truly impressive. With a single glance, she had immediately determined that his body art was more powerful. "Come battle." The young girl was extremely domineering and resolute, and she immediately rushed forward to attack Ling Han. Upon seeing her attack, Ling Han could confirm that she wasn't exaggerating at all. Her battle prowess was truly terrifying. Ji Wuming was already powerful, but his vitality index was only approaching 4,900. It hadn't passed this threshold. However, Huo Furong had definitely passed this threshold. She was completely able to rival Ling Han. In fact, she might even be able to surpass him. Her vitality index had most likely reached 4,950. The evolution index of this young girl had definitely surpassed 11. In fact, it was surging toward 12. Ling Han was stunned. This was the most powerful prodigy that he had ever encountered. Indeed, even Huai Jian couldn't compare to her. However, evolution index was only evolution index. Coming across rare opportunities was another matter altogether. Ling Han activated his body art, allowing his vitality index to approach 5,000. His battle prowess instantly surpassed hers. Huh! Huo Furong wore an astonished expression. "You clearly haven't entered the heaven forbidden state, and you clearly didn't ingest any crimson demonic earth, either." So how is your battle prowess so close to the celestial king tier? Guess. Ling Han replied with a smile. This young girl appeared far too petite and young, so he couldn't bring himself to treat her as an opponent no matter what. He came to a sudden realization and he said, You're the Green Flame's Heavenly Venerate's descendant? She's my master. Huo Furong chided. She furrowed her slender brows, and she appeared extremely infuriated. Her master had always been single, so how could she have a descendant? Ling Han was slandering a heavenly venerate. It was no wonder that she looked so petite and young. She was most likely practicing some kind of cultivation technique that allowed her to maintain this form. Ling Han pushed Huo Furong back with a punch, smilingly saying, If you don't enter the heaven-forbidden state, you won't be able to rival me. Even though her vitality index was only a few dozen lower than his, once their battle dragged on for long enough, his advantage would grow greater and greater. How arrogant! Huo Furong said with a contemptuous smile. However, you are right about one thing. I need to be more serious. Boom! Green flames erupted around her, appearing as frightening as could be. Chapter 2444 Trapped. Chapter 2444 Trapped. Green flames rose, and Huo Furong's aura also soared. Before long, her aura had surpassed the celestial king tier. How was this possible? Battle prowess was battle prowess, and this could indeed surpass cultivation levels. Right now, however, it wasn't Huo Furong's battle prowess that had surpassed the celestial king tier. Instead, it was her vitality index that had surpassed 5,000. One had to realize that regardless of whether it was the heaven-forbidden state or the crimson demonic earth, these things could only elevate one's vitality index to a level infinitesimally close to that of celestial kings. Now, however, Huo Furong's vitality index had definitely surpassed 5,000. In other words, she was now a celestial king. Both Dongfang Rui and Xianrong respected her, and she had even defeated Ji Wuming in his previous life. It was clear that she had astonishing talents. However, this was far too astonishing. Huo Furong is regarded as the most powerful prodigy in all of history. If it weren't for this flawless celestial seed, perhaps she would have already become a heavenly venerate, Dongfang Rui said. He could barely contain his envy. Xianrong also nodded, saying, The Green Flame's heavenly venerate has great hopes for her, and she hopes that she can become a second-tier heavenly venerate. They had both been born far later than Huo Furong, so they had both heard about her legend. In fact, even the sealed emotion Heavenly Venerable and the Jiuwu Heavenly Venerate had personally stated that their descendants were inferior to Huo Furong. If anyone else had said this, they naturally would have been unhappy. However, the two Heavenly Venerates had personally said this, so they had no option but to accept this. Huo Furong's aptitude could be regarded as peerless in history. She could be viewed as the #1 celestial maiden in the world. Little brat, when I was defeating opponents throughout the world, you were still nowhere to be seen, Huo Furong said. She was like a queen of flames, with her entire body enveloped in scorching green fire. However, she remained indestructible. Meanwhile, the flames were so fiery that Ling Han felt a strong urge to avoid touching them. This was far too terrifying. Source power of flames? Ling Han guessed. This was because he had once possessed the source power of flame as well. However, after advancing to the Immortal Palace tier, he had severed the 9 source powers. Right now, they were also about to become celestial kings. However, source powers of heaven and earth were already at the celestial king tier to begin with, so the 9 source powers didn't need to traverse the celestial path. After reaching a suitable cultivation, they would naturally advance in tier. Indeed, Huo Furong replied. She reached out her right hand, showing her snow-white and almost transparent skin. She was truly as delicate and exquisite as jade. A small rabbit materialized in her palm, so small that it appeared a little pitiful. It hopped around in her hand. This rabbit was completely formed from flames, and it radiated with a sense of liveliness and might. Her aptitude was peerless, and when she had traveled through the world, many source powers had actively recognized her as their master. Thus, she had easily reached the dividing 9 souls. Moreover, she was an individual of great ambition and willpower, so she had also given up these source powers when advancing to the immortal palace tier. Afterward, however, another source power that was nearing great accomplishment had actively recognized her master. This was the boundless green phoenix flame in her hand. "Then come battle!" Ling Han said. He unleashed an attack at Huo Furong. Huo Furong casually counterattacked. Her battle prowess was petrifying at this moment. With a single wave of her hand, it was as if she could obliterate heaven and earth. Her vitality index had soared to a whopping 5100. Ling Han needed to exert great effort to keep up. However, he remained fearless. Huo Furong was indeed more powerful than him. However, his physique was also unbelievably powerful. Cancel out their advantages, and their battle prowess was actually similar. Neither side enjoyed an advantage over the other. After 1,000 exchanges, Huo Furong actively retreated from the battle. She waved her hand and said, "You're not bad." "You're also very powerful," Ling Han said with a nod. "There are far too many limits right now. Let's battle again after advancing to the Celestial King tier," she said. Ling Han agreed to her request. Before becoming a Celestial King, even though they had all kinds of techniques to possess a battle prowess at the Celestial King tier, they were still subject to many prohibitive limits. Ji Wuming was also burning with fighting spirit. Back then, he had been no match for Huo Furong. He had only just managed to endure 100 exchanges. However, he had already been Huo Furong's most powerful opponent. Moreover, he had gone on to become the most powerful 9th Heaven Celestial King, so this was proof enough of his talent. However, Huo Furong was even more powerful than him. In fact, she had already possessed the aptitude to become a heavenly venerate back then. It was only because of her lofty ambition to become a second-tier heavenly venerate that she had remained sealed for several epochs. Just thinking about such an opponent made his body shake. It wasn't out of fear, but excitement. Ling Han and Ji Wuming were both the kind of people to become more excited the more powerful their opponent was. The emotions of exasperation and dispiritedness had absolutely nothing to do with them. Huo Furong sat down, listening to the speculations the others had about the island. As she listened, her gaze slowly wandered to Little Terror. It was clear that she was itching to play with him. In fact, it was as if she could barely contain herself from snatching Little Terror over. "If we work together, what's the chance that we can break through the restriction of the water vines?" Jiao Lan asked. 100%, Dongfang Rui said with confidence. Ling Han frowned upon hearing this. In reality, they had very little understanding of the water vines. They didn't even know how many existed. What if this was a large number? For example, 1,000, 5,000, or even 100,000? They were unaware of their enemy's situation, so how could they possibly estimate their chances? Of course, the Prodigies here were indeed very powerful. If they teamed up, they could most likely resist all of the remaining ascending origin tier elites. "Why don't we give it a shot?" Shi Chanzi suggested. Even though there was great internal conflict among their group, they all had a shared goal at this moment: to cross the sea. Thus, there was a good reason for them to work together. "Then let's go." Everyone nodded in agreement. They walked to the shore, and someone tossed out the corpse of an immortal beast to use as a ship. They all leaped on, after which they pushed with their palm to sail out to sea. It wasn't long before a sinister undercurrent caught up to them. "Those water vines are trying to destroy our ship again," they all said. "We'll form groups of 2 and try our best to keep the water vines away. One group will stand guard, and the others will rest. We'll rotate groups every 1 hour," Huo Furong said, pulling her gaze away from Little Terror. No one raised any objections. After all, there needed to be someone in charge. As the strongest person, and as someone who could suppress the descendants of the sealed emotion Heavenly Venerable and Zhouwu Heavenly Venerate, Huo Furong was indeed the best choice. She didn't have any direct conflicts with Ling Han either. The first group to stand watch was Shi Chanzi and Jiao Lan. The two of them jumped into the sea, and it wasn't long before everyone else detected the ripples of battle. However, they quickly received calls for reinforcement from the two cultivators. The water vines, number 300! Everyone was given a fright upon hearing this. The battle prowess of these water vines wasn't overwhelming, and it was actually the pressure of the sea that was the most terrifying. Even with Ling Han's freakish physique, he still couldn't endure this pressure for too long. Thus, battling in the sea put them at a huge disadvantage. 300 water vines. This was a petrifying number. Even Huo Furong couldn't help but furrow her brows. Unless she advanced to the celestial king tier, there was simply no way she could battle against 300 water vines in the sea. How were there so many? Damn it! More water vines are attacking! They received even worse news. They hurriedly paddled back, returning to the island. They looked toward the sea, only to see hundreds of water vines poking out from the surface. It was as if they had disturbed a dense nest of snakes. This was a harrowing scene. They're genuinely trying to oppose us. We can now confirm that these water vines are purposefully trying to trap us on this island. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made it here. If these water vines had all rushed over to attack them before, they would have been left with only a single option, that was to advance to the celestial king tier. What are they planning to do? None of them could make head nor tail of the situation. Chapter 2445 Fruit Fragrance. Chapter 2445 Fruit Fragrance. Ling Han and the others were all trapped on the island. There were hundreds of water vines blocking their path, and they couldn't break through this barrier at all. They had attempted to leave from different directions, yet they discovered that there was a mind-numbing number of water vines. Each direction had been blocked by several hundred water vines. It was clear that these water vines didn't want them to leave. We can't just stay like this. Everyone frowned in thought. They didn't have any time to waste. To say nothing of the fact that they could only stay here for 10,000 years, the most important thing was that there was still a flawless celestial seed to fight for. This pertained to reaching the heavenly Venerable tier. In fact, it even pertained to how far they could ascend in the heavenly Venerable tier. No one was willing to advance to the celestial king tier, sacrificing themselves to help the others. Before the last moment arrived, no one was willing to do this. One by one, the days crept by. No one else arrived on the island. It was as if this island genuinely only welcomed monarch stars. Huh! 1 month passed, and everyone suddenly sat up in surprise. Do you guys smell that? Dong Fengrui asked. Xianrong nodded and replied. It's an indescribable fragrance. This fragrance even contains the fragments of a celestial seed. Even though it's only some fragments, according to my analysis, the level of this celestial seed is astonishingly high. Sure Chanzi said. They all possessed a complete celestial seed mark in their divine sense, so it was naturally very easy to perform a comparison. Everyone exchanged a glance. There's a celestial tree here. This was a celestial tree, and it had produced a complete celestial seed. Moreover, the level of this celestial seed was astonishingly high. Perhaps those water vines trapped us here so that we could obtain this celestial seed? Jiao Lan arrived at a hard-to-believe conclusion. Was this possible? Bewitching Maiden Ro pondered for a moment before saying, the celestial seed was about to ripen, so the water vines forced us onto this island to obtain this rare opportunity. Otherwise, it would be a waste of this celestial seed. That would be opposed to the Tao of heaven and earth, Dong Fengrui said with a nod. He appeared confident in his conclusion. This was most likely the case. The water vines had herded them here, and they simply trapped them here without attacking. A while ago, they still hadn't understood the reason behind this. They couldn't figure out the reason no matter how hard they racked their brains. Now, however, everything could be explained. This was an opportunity bestowed upon them by heaven and earth. Why could only monarch stars arrive here? This was because the other measly cultivators weren't worthy of obtaining such a high-level celestial seed. This isn't the flawless celestial seed, is it? Xianrong suddenly remarked. His heart thumped against his chest. Even as the descendant of a heavenly venerate, he couldn't help but feel a strong sense of greed. This celestial seed could be the determining factor regarding whether they could ascend to the heavenly venerable tier or not. Otherwise, it wasn't as if monarch stars hadn't appeared in the past before. However, how many of them had become heavenly venerates? They had to grab this opportunity with both hands. No matter what, let's look for it first, Huo Furong said. Everyone followed the trail of the fragrance. They traversed the mountains, and they quickly discovered a cave of unknown depth. It was pitch black, not emitting a single ray of light. Even with their powerful vision, they couldn't see into the cave. I can't observe it with my divine sense either. This cave is extremely peculiar, and it's as if it can engulf all matter, allowing only entrance but no exit, the Rain Emperor said in a solemn voice. Ling Han pondered for a moment, and said, The worst-case scenario will be if we can only enter and not exit as well. This place was far too eerie. Even though this could be explained as a bestowal from heaven and earth, those water vines in the sea were far too sinister. Ling Han found it difficult to believe that this was a great opportunity. Perhaps it was, but it would definitely be riddled with grave dangers. Coward! Dong Fang said with a sneer. The Rain Emperor glared at him and asked, You're itching for a beating. Dong Fang almost exploded in rage. However, glancing at the displeased Empress and Hu Niu, and glancing at the calm Ling Han, who knew what kind of terrifying killing intent was hidden under their faces, he calculated the strength of both sides. If they truly engaged in a conflict, only Xianrong was certain to help him. Meanwhile, Ling Han's side had 4 people only counting monarch stars. There was a great imbalance in power. He couldn't engage in this conflict. Of course, this was unless Xianrong was willing to advance to the Celestial King tier. However, a grand opportunity awaited them, so he naturally couldn't mess things up here. Forget about it. He would endure this. He lowered his head, ignoring the Rain Emperor's threat. Don't provoke others if you're not strong enough, fucking idiot, Ling Han said. His voice was extremely loud. Dong Fang almost exploded in anger. Back then, he had been invincible in his cultivation level, and he had been referred to as peerless under the level of Celestial King. In fact, after entering the Heaven Forbidden state, he had even been able to rival those at the first heaven. Just how domineering had he been? Moreover, his father was a heavenly venerate, so even 9th heaven Celestial Kings had to treat him with respect. Since when had he ever been derided like this? The others all exchanged a glance. However, no one spoke up for him. At their level, they were all loath to rely on outside power. If they encountered any problem, they would strive to overcome it by themselves. Dong Fang had caused this problem himself, and it was also he who had to cower back now. No one would show him any sympathy. Huo Furong wore an expression of impatience, and she said, Hurry up. She took the lead, walking into the cave. With her extraordinary strength, she could make it out alive even if she were ambushed by a 2nd heaven Celestial King tier. The others followed behind her. Ling Han and his companions naturally stuck together. Ling Han walked in the front, while the Rain Emperor stayed at the back. However, there was also Shi Chanzi behind the Rain Emperor, and Ji Wuming was even further behind her. This provided them with another layer of defense. By allowing Shi Chanzi to walk before him, Ji Wuming was also showing an intention to protect this grand disciple from his previous life. This way, there would be Ling Han in front of her and he behind her. It was almost impossible to break through their defenses. After taking a few steps, all that remained before them was an expanse of pitch black. They could barely see 3 meters before them. Moreover, their divine sense was also limited to this small range. If they tried to detect anything beyond this, their divine sense would be completely engulfed. They wouldn't be able to sense anything. Fortunately, they could follow the path of the fragrance. Moreover, there was only a single path here, so they didn't need to be afraid of getting lost. However, after walking for a while, 3 separate paths appeared before them. Boom! An orb of green flames instantly burst to life in Huo Furong's hand, illuminating an area that measured at least 30 meters in radius. This was an origin flame of heaven and earth, and it was perhaps even at the level of Celestial King. Thus, it was naturally extraordinarily mighty. The three caves all looked similar. In fact, what did it matter even if they were very different? They weren't familiar with this place anyway. Taking another sniff, they realized that the fragrance was traveling over from all three paths. Moreover, they were all similar in concentration. That being the case, how should they choose? Everyone furrowed their brows. Their divine sense couldn't extend too far in this place. Otherwise, they would have used it to scout the different paths. Let's split up, Dongfang Rui immediately said. He had never wanted to travel with Ling Han anyway. Moreover, upon thinking of the possibility that this was the flawless celestial seed, he more so didn't want to travel with the others. After all, the flawless celestial seed would definitely trigger an intense battle. Truth be told, his battle prowess wouldn't give him an advantage either. Thus, splitting up here was the best option that he could take. Everyone exchanged a glance before nodding in agreement. People were all selfish. If there were only a single flawless celestial seed, who wouldn't want to obtain it for themselves? Then let's part ways, Xianrong said as he left the group. He chose the leftmost path. Meanwhile, Huo Furong chose the central path. After hesitating for a brief moment, Xiao Lan also chose this path. Perhaps it was because they were both females, so she felt like it would be better to follow Huo Furong. One after another, they all made their choice. However, they still traveled in their groups. For example, Shi Chanzi left with Ji Wuming, while Ling Han and his wives traveled with the Rain Emperor. Each group chose one of the three paths. After walking for a moment, they came to a stop once again. Another fork appeared before them. This time, however, it wasn't a fork of three paths. Instead, it was a fork of 5, 7, and 8 paths. Ling Han immediately frowned upon seeing this. This is a maze? Should we retreat? Bewitching Maiden Ro asked. Chapter 2446 Smelly Insects. Chapter 2446 Smelly Insects. It was only the second fork, and 7 paths had already appeared in front of them. Even if they completely split apart, it was still not enough to traverse every single path completely to the end. And it could be imagined that there would definitely be other forks later, so how were they supposed to choose? Ling Han thought for a while, and then said, If we are not going back, we should choose one path and go on. They had more than enough time, and could explore for a while here. Furthermore, with their memory, it would be fine even if there were even more crossroads. They were completely capable of walking back. The Rain Emperor said, I will walk one path alone. He was not someone that needed others to take care of him, but a great and noble monarch star. Ling Han was naturally unworried about the strength of his second brother. He nodded. Be careful, second brother. You guys too. The Rain Emperor chose the leftmost path. Meanwhile, Ling Han and the others took the rightmost path. When they encountered another fork, they would make the same choice. In this way, there would eventually come a day when they would meet back up again. The 5 of them went their separate ways. After Ling Han and his group traveled for a while, as expected, they saw another crossroads ahead of them. I hate labyrinths. They're no fun. Hu Niu pouted, appearing very unhappy. Ling Han was just about to speak, but he immediately waved a hand. I hear something. All 3 women entered combat stance, and Little Terror also bared its fangs, exposing its ferocious nature. Pa pa pa. There was indeed a light noise coming from ahead of them. Only a while later they saw something the size of a water buffalo appear before them. Upon first glance, Ling Han thought that he had gone to the foreign realm again. This gigantic creature looked very much like an insect. Its whole body was covered with an outer shell, and there were light hairs all over this shell, and it had short, slender legs beneath. Right, it had legs all over. It was unlike the 100 legs of a centipede, but was rather more like wild grass, growing all over each other from its body. There were so many legs all over that a mere look was enough to cause disgust. What kind of insect was this? It was too ugly. Ling Han did not discover any eyes on this insect. True, if it had been living constantly in such conditions, what use did it have for eyes? Though Little Terror had no hair, its armor-like skin was very tense, showing the extreme state of nervousness it was in. This insect should be very extraordinary. Otherwise, there was no way that Little Terror would have such a reaction. Ling Han spread out his divine sense, wanting to communicate with this insect. Even if there was a language barrier, it would not affect communication via divine sense. However, when his divine sense touched the insect, he felt that the response from it was completely chaotic and vague, and they could not communicate at all. Roar! The insect released an attack. It opened its mouth, and a shock wave immediately reverberated out. Ling Han and the others instantly felt a terrible pain in their eardrums, as if they were about to be ripped apart. Duo! Ling Han shouted loudly. Regulations shot forth, turning into multiple sharp blades that streaked towards the shock wave. Shwa, 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 they tore the shock wave into pieces in just a few movements. The insect opened its mouth again. Roar, a terrifying sound wave was launched again, turning into sharp blades that shot towards Ling Han and his group. Ling Han was shocked. This guy would actually learn his tricks. He had turned his voice into a weapon, and this stupid insect actually learned from his example? The Empress shoved out Hu Nio. Go! It was not that she feared battle, but rather that this insect was really too hideous. It was not worthy of her noble self. Nio's not going! Hu Nio shouted in fury. She turned around to push the Empress instead. Bewitching Maiden Ro could only feel speechless. These were the two main ladies of Ling Han's harem. They would always be contending with one another, and could not stop. Ling Han shook his head as well. He pounced out, and charged towards the insect. Pun, 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 he shot out a series of punches, the force of each punch growing in succession, pummeling this insect to the point that it could only retreat continuously. After being hit consecutively with 17 punches, the insect retreated no further. It was like it had been punched silly. But after only a short while, it was ripped apart from the inside out, and a green liquid instantly gushed out, spraying all over. So smelly! All four of them covered their noses at the same time. This insect had practically been fished out of a cesspool. Its blood carried a terrible stench. They did not want to study the insect's corpse at all. They hurriedly sped up their steps, and rapidly passed by the corpse. But after they had walked for a while, the rustling sounds of footsteps rang out again. From behind them, at least 3 insects crawled out, immediately moving to consume the bits of dead flesh and blood on the ground, and after another while, 4 more insects arrived, joining the contest for food. Naturally, Ling Han and the others did not know this. They rapidly walked for quite a while, and only when they could no longer smell that stench did they feel like a weight had been lifted from them. The fruit's fragrance could once again be smelled. Just how far is this celestial fruit away from us? All 4 of them were curious. Smelling the intensity of this fragrance, they were sure that this celestial fruit should be quite close, yet why had they not come upon it yet? Right at this moment, the sound of footsteps was heard again. It's here again! Ling Han said. True enough, in just a few breaths of time, 2 insects appeared ahead of them, as large as bulls. Without saying another word, Ling Han directly rushed onwards. Ping, 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 he solved the problem with over a dozen punches again. This time, he had learned his lesson. The moment he killed them, he immediately stowed the bodies of the insects into his spatial god tool to prevent the harm to their noses. However, the substance inside the bodies of these insects was really too smelly. Even if just the slightest bit was exposed, even if it was just a really short amount of time, the intensity of stench would be unbearable. More importantly, the number of these insects was astonishing. At first, they would only charge out from ahead of them, but later they would charge out from behind them, and there were countless insects at the forks. By now, they had already encountered 379 insects. The party of 4 looked livid. It should be known that they were all pseudo-celestial kings, yet they were still feeling so horrible from the stench, which was proof enough of how smelly these insects were. Let's just forget about the celestial seed. Hu Nio was already beating the drums for retreat. Her pretty little face was scrunched up tightly. Ling Han said, If we retreat, we will only be trapped, But here we can perhaps find the way to leave. Huo thought for a while. Ling Han was right, so she could only force herself to tolerate this. They forged onwards for another while longer, and they discovered that the number of insects was soaring. The strength of these insects was actually very weak. Their vitality index should be around 4,700, which was stronger than even the majority of pseudo-celestial kings. However, the person they were facing was Ling Han, whose body art was close to reaching celestial king tier. Naturally, they would be crushed in 2 to 3 moves. But they were really too smelly, and this stench was very penetrating and stuck easily. Now, Ling Han and the others all felt as if their bodies had been infected with the stench. No matter where they went, their noses would be able to smell that extraordinarily nasty stench, and it could not be dispersed at all. If it were not for the fact that they could still smell the fragrance of the celestial fruit, they would definitely have been unable to hold themselves back from throwing up. It's come again! They had just finished killing a pack, and had not managed to walk too far yet when footsteps rang out again from ahead of them. Ling Han did not want to use his fists again. No matter how he used the power of regulation as a shield, he would still get a sliver of that stench attached to him. Hence, he summoned the divine demon's sword. A figure appeared. Shua, Ling Han raised the divine demon's sword and delivered a slash. Ding! Unexpectedly, this figure actually sent out a flash of light as well, and even the darkness could not swallow this light. The 2 flashes of light collided, instantly exploding in a terrifying shockwave. Pun! That figure was instantly sent backwards along with that flash of light before crashing into the cave wall behind him and bouncing back again. It's you! Chapter 2447 Extraordinary Numbers. Chapter 2447 Extraordinary Numbers. That figure opened his mouth and scolded Ling Han. Actually, when he saw that figure also delivering a light attack, Ling Han knew that it was not an insect, but a human being. That light naturally was a celestial tool, so even the darkness here could not conceal it, but it was also because he could see who the other was that Ling Han had not held back, and still delivered this sword strike. The other man was Dong Fengrui. Too bad. The other party had instantly entered the heaven-forbidden state, unleashing celestial king tier battle prowess, or this strike should have been able to kill him. Ling Han couldn't help but mumble inwardly. At present, he could only kill this kind of opponent by catching him off guard. Otherwise, he would have to either enter into heaven-forbidden state, or simply break through to the celestial king tier, when he would have double layers of security. Dong Fengrui wiped the blood at the corners of his lips. If he hadn't entered into heaven-forbidden state in time just now, he would definitely have been sliced into pieces by now. And even then, he had still been a little late, which resulted in him having sustained slight injury. Since childhood, he had never been bullied by anyone before, yet had now experienced a loss repeatedly at Ling Han's hand, which infuriated him. Oh, it's you. I thought it was a smelly insect. After all, you guys look similar. Ling Han laughed. Dong Fengrui was furious. You have struck and almost killed me, and now you are actually still mocking me? Damn it! Hi's whole body was trembling, yet he did not say a single word. Instead, he turned and left. He vowed internally that when he became a celestial king, he would definitely kill Ling Han. No, killing was not enough to vent his hatred. He wanted to tear Ling Han into pieces. Ling Han did not set off in pursuit. There was no point in wasting the energy. This really is a labyrinth, the Empress said, her delicate brows frowning deeply. Ling Han nodded. Dong Fengrui had actually walked towards them, and this was enough proof. Still, why would they feel that they were coming closer and closer to the celestial seed? The fragrance was becoming stronger and stronger, which showed that they were drawing close to their goal, but it was clear that was the same for Dong Fengrui. Their meeting had become a very bizarre occasion. This island is bizarre, and this place is strange too, Ling Han said. And these smelly insects too, Huo added, her small face scrunched up. They were so smelly that they greatly affected her appetite. She didn't even want to eat meat anymore. They were really too despicable. Are we still going onwards? Bewitching Maiden Ro asked. Ling Han shook his head. Let's retreat to the fork before, and try out a different path. They had just turned when they heard slight noises ring out, and they stopped. They were in for another battle again. Only a while later, the insects appeared. Because Ling Han had drawn the divine demon sword, the light of the sword was enough to illuminate a range of 30 meters, so they could see very clearly. 1, 2, 3, at least 100 insects surged out, causing the faces of Ling Han and his group to twitch madly. Previously, they would only encounter 17 insects at most, but even so, they had still battled till the stench rose sky-high, which made them almost want to throw up. And now, over 100 insects had appeared, so just how smelly would they be after the battle? However, these insects did not launch an assault right from the get-go, but rather crawled in a very systematic manner before splitting apart, as if they were guards that were clearing the way. Very soon, a colossal creature appeared. This was still an insect, but a massive horn was growing from its head. It was grayish-green in color, and it was about 9 meters in size. Its whole body was fat and rounded like a worm and had no legs. Instead, it was being carried by several other insects. What was this? The insect queen? Ling Han dared not be careless, and stayed on his guard. The giant insect set eyes on Ling Han and his group. Its horn was actually flashing with lightning, which then gushed out, turning into terrifying bolts of lightning that burst fiercely towards them. Humph! The Empress moved, and swiped out a finger. The power of regulation surged forth. Pun! In this exchange, both sides emerged as equals. Ling Han frowned. The Empress's vitality index had reached 4,800, and this meant that the giant insect's vitality index was also around this number. This was extremely shocking. If this was an insect king, and there was only this single one here, that would be fine, but if this kind of giant insect was only a commander, that would be terrifying. There would be stronger insects. Ling Han handed the divine demon sword over to the Empress, and the latter delivered a slash. Her battle prowess was on full throttle, and as flashes of sword she swept out, insects would be involved one after another. Immediately, they would be ripped to pieces. The divine demon sword by itself was a powerful weapon, and added with the Empress, whose vitality index was as high as 4,800, the destructive power unleashed was naturally shocking. With the boost of the divine demon sword, even that giant insect was no match for the Empress, and was soon slashed in half. The ground was covered with the bodies of pawns, the insect blood flowing everywhere. The rank stench could not be described. Ling Han and the others hurriedly retreated, but this time, Ling Han forced himself to bear with the extraordinary stench, and sliced off the horn growing from the head of the giant insect. He was very intrigued by this horn. As they walked onwards, Ling Han studied that horn. Its internal structure is very strange. It is covered with some seals that can extract the power of lightning and turn it into an attack. Ling Han soon managed to get some clues, but the exact details of the seals could not be seen, because they were already damaged. When most powerful immortal beasts died, they would automatically destroy the seals in their bodies so that the ultimate techniques of their line would not be learned by outsiders. That giant insect was the same. The insect horn was made from some unknown material, and was extremely hard. It could just barely hold up against a celestial tool. At least, when the divine demon sword delivered a slash, only a light mark was left behind. This is just a nest of insects, and they are extremely and extraordinarily smelly, but why would there be a celestial tree here? Ling Han was curious. Celestial trees would indeed choose locations that had terrible conditions, but it was not logical that one would take root in such an incredibly smelly location. He had always suspected that this was not some place of great fortune. The water vines were too evil, and with these smelly insects added into the mix, Ling Han's suspicions grew stronger. Still, no matter what, we have to find the way out. They continued exploring this cave, and they would naturally endlessly suffer the assault of the insects. Ling Han's previous worries had also been realized. There was not just one of those single-horned insects. The majority of these horned insects had a vitality index of around 4,800, but there were some particularly stronger ones that reached 4850. This was very powerful, and even the Empress would be very strained in a battle against such an opponent. Ling Han did not want the Empress to easily consume the crimson demonic earth. Hence, he streaked forward, and very quickly resolved the battle. Over these dozen or so days, they would encounter a group of insects practically once every half an hour. Though they weren't difficult to deal with, it still caused them to become more and more rank in smell. In the meantime, they also encountered other people, but even when they met others, they did not join forces, but rather each walked their own path. They all had their own ideas. If this was a labyrinth, this was for the best. As long as they could get out of the labyrinth, they would be able to take the celestial seed for themselves. Day after day passed, and even a guy with an astonishing physique like Ling Han felt a strong sense of weariness. This was confusing to him. With his strength, he should not feel weary so quickly. It was not just him. Bewitching Maiden Ro, Hu Nio, and the Empress were the same. But it should be known that they had practically not fought at all afterwards, so why would they feel weary now? The insects are poisonous. They all discovered the root of the issue. These insects carried poison by themselves, or would emanate poison upon death, and this poison had the effect of inducing weariness. And precisely because it was slowly emanating, it would only take effect once enough had been accumulated, and was not fatal. It had fooled their bodies and taken effect quietly. When they realized that something was off, they would already be deeply ensnared in the mire. With a thought, Ling Han released the limits on his cultivation level, but there was not the slightest bit of unusual movement. Chapter 2448 Insect Cave. Chapter 2448 Insect Cave. Ling Han and his group all had a very strong trump card, and that was the fact that they could break through at any time. When they advanced into the Celestial King tier, they naturally would have nothing to fear. But now, under the effects of the insect poison, their condition became extremely poor. Even if they lifted the limits on their cultivation level, they could not break through. This undoubtedly disabled them from dealing their strongest card. This is the true motive of those water vines entrapping us, right? Trap them first so they could not escape, and then use the celestial seed as bait. In that previous emotional state, the chances of them entering into the cave and exploring would naturally be greatly increased. Then, the trap would finally be revealed. It was probable that everyone had fallen into the trap. Then, the killing intent should appear very soon, Ling Han murmured. The Empress and the others all looked solemn. Even Hu Nio was no longer cheery. In the past, no matter what kind of danger they encountered, they still had a path of retreat, and that was the Black Tower, which could shield and hide them. Now they would have to depend on themselves entirely. It was possible that the slightest misstep could be stepping into an abyss of no return. Another few days later, they suddenly realized that they had actually not encountered another fork after traveling for so long. This was extremely inconceivable. Previously, they wouldn't have to walk too far to encounter another fork time and again, and after some twists and turns, they were close to being driven completely dizzy. Yet now, more than half a day had passed, and they had not encountered any fork, which they were very unused to. However, though there weren't any more forks, the waves of insects were still endless, advancing wave upon wave, surging towards them. Every single one of them held no fear of death, and they were extremely troublesome to deal with. The poor condition of Ling Han and his group was becoming more and more serious, their battle prowess declining drastically. As they went further, the number of insects became greater and greater. They were also crazier, obstructing their progress as much as they possibly could. But the more they did so, the more Ling Han and the others wanted to forge onwards. It was very possible that this was the path of escape for them. In this manner, they continued journeying endlessly onwards. Another day later, they suddenly walked out. It was not that they had walked out of the cave, but rather it had become an extremely large mountain cave ahead of them. The height of the cave was unknown, and its size was also indescribable. In the middle, a peak suddenly shot up, and the peak was covered completely with insects. There were centipedes, horned insects, and even a few winged insects, though these were very few. Fuck, they had actually barged into an insect nest. Ling Han inhaled sharply. The insects here numbered more than thousands, so numerous and close together they seemed like an ocean. Even if their strength was extremely high, they were firstly affected by the insect poison, and secondly, there were really too many enemies. Even if they just crowded all over the human party, the latter could drown to death. Ling Han suddenly discovered a green flame flare up. He turned to look, and saw that Huo Furong was walking out of a separate passageway not too far away. When she saw this mountain and ocean of insects, she involuntarily frowned. Practically at around the same time, the Rain Emperor, Ji Wuming, Jiao Lan, and the others also walked out. Previously, there had been 11 of them, and there were still 11 of them now. She! An insect cry rang out, and all the insects turned to look at them practically at the same time. No matter what they had previously been doing, they all stopped. This scene was a little weird. Then boom, it was like a great mountain collapsing, and these insects rushed towards Ling Han and the others like a surging ocean. Quick, gather together! Seeing this scene, even the top celestial in all eras, Huo Furong, revealed a grim expression as she called out hurriedly to the rest, simultaneously retreating towards the passage. Not one of them dared to act tough. They all drew closer to Huo Furong. At present, if there was anyone that wanted to fight a solo battle, that would be a totally suicidal action. Ling Han, you and I will take the front. Shichanzi, Jiao Lan, the two of you assist from the side. Dongfang Rui, you guard the back, and as for the others, rest and wait for the next shift. Huo Furong immediately assigned them their respective tasks. No one voiced any disagreement. At this moment, no matter how large their grudges were, they had to put them aside first. If they could no longer break through to the Celestial King tier, they would have to depend on what power they had now to hold up against the insects. Shichanzi, Jiao Lan, and Dongfang Rui immediately consumed the Crimson Demonic Earth. Their enemies were too many and too strong. Without consuming the Crimson Demonic Earth, they would be in a very dangerous position. Ling Han and Huo Furong stood side by side in the frontmost position, facing the berserk surge of insects. They were the pillars of support here, and bore a large portion of the impact. Shichanzi and Jialan were really just assisting from the sides, helping the two of them deal with some insects that slipped past them. The battle was about to begin at any moment, and reach the climax in mere instants. It was incredibly intense. The torn limbs and pieces and blood of the insects danced in the air as Huo Furong stimulated the origin flame, forming a barrier of fire around them. Before the insect blood sprayed on them, it had already been burnt into ashes. Ling Han released a battle cry, using fists of fury and holding nothing back. His body art was incredibly strong, and every punch he delivered was at the Celestial King tier, domineering without compare. When his body art had been exhausted to a certain extent, he would switch to using the power of regulation, trying as much as possible to keep himself in prime condition. In terms of stamina, there was no one here that could compare to him. Over 2 hours later, Huo Furong, Jiaolan, and the others all looked ready to collapse, but Ling Han was still very energetic. As he ingested alchemical pills to recover his power of regulation, he ate like mad on the side in order to replenish his stamina. With both actions progressing in turns, his battle prowess was constantly maintained at a very high level. But countless insects died, and their blood spread all over the ground. A grayish substance seeped out of this blood, turning into mist. That was something that even an origin flame couldn't burn off completely. Incredibly stubborn, it was determined to seep through their defensive barrier. Thankfully, everyone waved and swept out their palms, and still managed to push this gray smoke outside. Change shift! Huo Furong called out loudly. Immediately, the remaining 6 people surged forwards at the same time. This group had a clear weakness, and that was bewitching Maiden Row, while the strongest was only Ji Wuming. Instantly, they were barraged by the insect ocean, retreating continuously towards the passageway. It was all the way until they had retreated 300 meters, and they just barely managed to regain their footing. The first group took the time to rest as much as possible. They had to recover as soon as possible, or it would not take too long before this team would crumble. The passage was actually quite wide, so the range they had to defend was also very wide, making their pressure great. Ji Wuming, the Empress, and the others were also trying their best. Those who should be eating crimson demonic earth did so, and those who should be using heaven forbidden state did the same. Otherwise, they would possibly be overwhelmed by the sea of insects at any moment. These insects were too mad. Xiao, a sharp gust struck, yet it was soundless and astonishingly quiet. Though Ling Han was in a state of rest, his eyes and ears were sharp and focused on the surroundings. The people battling now were his wives and brother, so how could he allow the slightest accident to happen? He immediately leaped over and sent out a punch. The divine demon sword had been handed over to the Empress, while the celestial king ring was on Hunyo's finger. Bewitching Maiden Ro had no precious tool. In any case, her strength was the lowest in the group, and this was basically above her pay grade, so even if she was given a celestial tool, she would not be of much use, either. Pang! A brilliance surged, and Ling Han's body trembled. A wound had been cut open on his fist. It was not very deep, but the wound was grayish-green in color. Clearly, it had been infected with strong poison. As he channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, he looked into the distance, and there he saw a winged insect slowly withdrawing its mouth. Just now, it was this insect that had spat out a sharp arrow from its mouth, directly aiming for Hunyo. Not only was this arrow very powerful, the fact that it managed to wound Ling Han showed its extraordinary nature. It was also soundless and silent, extremely sneaky and dangerous. This was truly an attack by a hidden enemy. Chapter 2449 Killing the Leader Amidst an Army of Thousands. Chapter 2449 Killing the Leader Amidst an Army of Thousands. There were 3 types of insects, and all had their own uniquely frightening traits. The blood of the multi-legged insects was mighty poisonous. Even if they were dead, they would cause extremely great trouble. Furthermore, their numbers were overwhelming, and they were the most low-cost troops, but their practical value was extremely high. The horned insects could release lightning, which was very powerful, and the long-distance damage value was astonishing. But the most terrifying were the winged insects. Not only could they launch sneak attacks, they had great destructive power, and could even wound Ling Han with his physique. If it was any other person that had sustained such a blow, even if they could grasp it with their hands, they would still definitely be pierced right through. Only a celestial tool could block it. Be careful, Ling Han advised. Those insects with wings can launch sneak attacks, and they are extremely frightening. The indestructible heaven scroll channeled, and a golden seal appeared on Ling Han's body. Slivers of green smoke immediately wafted from his arm. That was the poison being evaporated. Indestructible heaven scroll! Dongfang Rui and the others all cast their eyes over, showing a hint of envy. Every single heavenly venerate had their unique advantage. The karmic life heavenly venerable had reached the pinnacle level of defense. A very large part of the reason why he had managed to face off 1 against 9 and resist 9 heavenly venerates of the foreign realm all by himself in the past could be attributed to the indestructible heaven scroll. This kind of pinnacle level defense was something that even the Green Flames heavenly venerate, Sealed Emotion heavenly venerable, and Jiuwu heavenly venerate were extremely tempted by. Unfortunately, the karmic life heavenly venerable had fused himself with Tao, and the Tower of 3 Realms had disappeared without a trace, and the indestructible heaven scroll had thus become lost. Now that it had shown itself again on Ling Han, Dongfang Rui and the others were naturally very envious. Xiao, another sneaky arrow came attacking, aimed directly for the Empress. But this time, the Empress was prepared. She swept out the divine demon sword, and sliced this arrow in half. There were only 4 winged insects, their numbers pitifully few, but their destructive power was extraordinarily great. Furthermore, they were hidden in dark corners and launching sneak attacks, which could not be guarded against. Everyone had to place a large share of their concentration on them. The moment these 4 insects appeared on the battlefield, they would be deadly weapons, and were capable of impeding a large portion of their focus. Ling Han frowned. These 4 insects definitely had to be gotten rid of. Otherwise, the pressure on their team would be too great. "I'll go kill them," he declared. He did not immediately make his move, but was rather channeling the regulations of space. At present, he was surrounded by various powerful elites, so he could completely focus on storing up power and make his adjustments. Shio, he suddenly moved. In a flash, he appeared in front of a winged insect, and then shot out a punch at it. At this time, it was the moment when that winged insect had unleashed a sneaky arrow. It was located in a relatively empty location, and when this punch from Ling Han flew out, it was aimed directly for the mouth that it was just closing. Previously, it had repeatedly launched sneaky arrows, yet now it had fallen into Ling Han's schemes, which could be considered as giving it a taste of its own medicine. The multi-legged insects in the area all released a strange cry, launching sound waves at Ling Han, and helping the winged insect out. With so many insects attacking at the same time, even Ling Han's physique could not bear it. Yet Ling Han ignored it completely. As he channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, a golden light shimmered all over him. In this instant, his defense was boundlessly strong, possibly reaching the extremes of a first heaven celestial king. Pun! His punch landed, and directly burst the throat of that winged insect. Jade-green blood spurted everywhere, and a grayish gas also rose up at the same time, filled with the air of death. Pun, pun, pun. Countless sound waves were also assailing him, causing Ling Han's whole body to tremble from the impact. However, his present defense was frighteningly powerful. This could only shake him, but could not wound him. Now that Ling Han's attack had succeeded, he immediately retreated. In this kind of situation, he would not be able to hold up for too long, so he naturally had to escape. He retreated, and it was like countless multi-legged insects had gone insane, setting off in hot pursuit of him. Multiple layers of sound waves rained down, seriously disturbing the space, so Ling Han did not dare to rashly use teleportation. As much as possible, he did not retreat back into the ranks, and was instead sinking into an even more disadvantageous position. A field of lightning swept out, and even swept over a great many multi-legged monsters. That was the show of might from the horned insects. Ling Han waved his fists in a furious barrage. With his loud cry, regulations and body art were deployed at the same time, and with the support of the indestructible heavens scroll, he had temporarily suppressed the poison. By now, he had recovered to his prime condition, and had incredibly terrifying battle prowess. There was no insect that could stop him. Wherever he passed, area after area of insects would be blasted flying. His speed was extremely fast as he rushed directly towards his team. The pressure was too great. The golden light all over his body very quickly dimmed. The indestructible heaven scroll could no longer channel automatically, and along with that, the poison in Ling Han's body showed its might once more, causing his battle prowess to drop madly. Right at this moment, Ling Han suddenly felt a strong sense of danger. Without a second thought, he sent a punch flying. Pun! A dark arrow shot over, and he forcefully blasted it into bits. In the distance, a winged insect was presently closing its mouth slowly, and another arrow was quietly formed, its speed very fast. This actually was regulation solidified, and had no solid form. Once it was destroyed, it would only be shards of regulations as well. Fuck! Ling Han cast a few more looks at that winged insect. When he pulled himself together, the next one he was going to kill was this damn insect. He was covered with wounds all over, but finally managed to charge back into the ranks. A drop of indestructible true fluid circulated, and the injuries on his body immediately recovered. However, the poison could not be removed completely, and it was still difficult for his battle prowess to return to its prime condition. Recover your condition quickly. Soon it will be your turn to switch shifts, Huo Furong said. Everyone turned to look at him, showing a hint of admiration. To kill the enemy commander amidst an army of thousands. While it was not as simple as simply plucking an object from his pocket, how many pseudo-celestial kings could manage this feat? This should be the only one, and even Huo Furong could not do so. That was because Huo Furong was not versed in the regulations of space, and could not teleport right in front of the winged insect. Furthermore, if she penetrated the enemy ranks deeply, the winged insect, knowing how ferocious she was, would definitely retreat continuously. How could it be that it would just obediently wait for death? As for the others, there was probably absolutely zero chance they could kill it. They would have been blasted into bits halfway through. Ling Han flopped onto the ground and ingested a few alchemical pills in succession. On the one hand, it was to suppress the poison in his body as much as possible, and on the other, his source power had also been seriously exhausted. Ji Wuming and the others were more and more strained. Primarily, it was because these three winged insects were extremely frightening as they would launch sneak shots occasionally. If it were not for the fact that one of them had already been killed off by Ling Han, the pressure on the group would definitely be even greater. Switch! Huo Furong shouted loudly. The first team of 5 surged forth together, switching with Ji Wuming, the Empress, and the others. The flood of insects was still as it had been, wave after wave rushing towards them endlessly. Now that Ling Han had switched shifts, it naturally was impossible that he would have any more excess energy to kill the winged insects, which allowed those 3 winged insects to become even more unreserved in their attacks. Thankfully, after the death of a winged insect, they had slight wariness. Otherwise, their attacks would be even more unreserved. Fight, fight, fight. The insect blood spurted everywhere. All of them had become numb. The only thought left in their minds was battle. It was unknown how much time had passed. Ji Wuming and the others had more or less recovered, and switched back with them, beginning a cycle. As Ling Han rested, he swept out towards those 3 winged insects. These 3 damn insects definitely had to be gotten rid of, or their situation would only become worse. He tolerated them for a considerably long time, and then suddenly activated space teleportation, appearing next to a winged insect. He threw a punch, powerful and heavy. He was going to insta-kill this damn insect. But this time, these insects were all prepared. He had only just appeared when 13 multi-legged insects released a sound wave, which turned into a massive boulder that crashed towards Ling Han. Damage was only secondary. Their primary motive was to send Ling Han flying, resolving the crisis that winged insect was in. Chapter 2450 Insect Queen. Chapter 2450 Insect Queen. Wang, series of sound waves assaulted, and it was incredibly terrifying. This time, the insects were all prepared. The moment Ling Han appeared, they would have already moved. If Ling Han did not parry them, he would only be sent flying by the sound waves. If he made a move in defense, his speed would definitely be impeded, allowing the winged insect an opportunity for escape. They had become smarter. Ling Han was stunned. He had attempted to communicate with these insects before, but had only discovered chaos on the other end. They were completely without intelligence. Now they actually knew how to attack to get their companion out of a crisis. How could their intelligence possibly grow so much in such a short few days' time? Ling Han did not believe this. There should be an insect that truly possessed intelligence that was communicating among them, gathering this pile of scattered sand into a united body. To defeat the enemy, the chief had to be captured first. A thought streaked through his mind. If the insect king could be killed, then this sea of insects might collapse. But with so many insects, where was he supposed to find a single insect kind? Furthermore, since the insect king had intelligence, it would definitely keep itself hidden. How could it be so easily discovered? Wang, wang, wang. The sound waves were already approaching. Ling Han put aside the thoughts in his mind. He definitely could not miss this chance. Otherwise, when the insects managed to deal with his sudden attacks, the chances of success would be even lower afterwards. He moved, and boundless light of time spread out. The wave of attack came to an abrupt halt, as if time had stopped. Ling Han directly barged over. Quang, the sound wave was destroyed, turning into solid shards that fell down, as if a crystal had been shattered. Xiao Ling Han's figure soared over them. That winged insect had also been affected by the flow of time, its speed becoming overwhelmingly slow. It was just opening its mouth in Ling Han's direction, a sneaky arrow already ready to be released, emanating an eerily dark luster. Ling Han released a battle cry, sending out a punch that crashed towards the throat of that winged insect. Pooh! Visibly, the end of an arrow pierced right through the back of the neck of that insect, but it immediately shattered. It was formed by regulations, and now that the winged insect had died, it naturally could no longer keep the form of the arrow that had been formed by regulations. Ling Han's attack had succeeded, and he immediately retreated. He felt like he was completely spent. Previously, he had channeled the regulations of time with his full energy, practically expending himself completely. If it were not for the fact that his body art was incredibly frightening, he would definitely have flopped onto the ground by now. He had clearly just increased the might of time flow by 20% to 30%, yet the source power he had expended had increased in tons. This quality-price ratio was really pitifully low. But for better or worse, he had succeeded, which pleased Ling Han greatly. Like a god of war, he charged back to his own ranks. With him killing 2 winged insects in a row, even those insects seemed to gain some fear. However, this only made their counterattack become even more berserk as they poured out towards Ling Han like a tsunami wave. Ling Han had been injured, but he did not channel the indestructible Heaven's Scroll. It had to be used at the most crucial moment. No insect could stop him. When Ling Han barged back to his own team, his whole body was bathed in green blood, which emanated an incredibly horrible stench. Huo Furong pressed down a palm. Green flames flickered, rapidly evaporating that blood, but slivers of grayish substance steamed out. The smell of it would turn anyone dizzy as they would feel a discomfort that could not be described. Ling Han flopped down, and hurriedly began to recuperate. Even Huo Furong nodded and said, "Later you can rest a while longer. I will take over for you the work that should be yours." Ling Han had killed 2 winged insects, greatly lightening the pressure on the team. This merit was something that no one could compare to. Ling Han was not reserved either. Though he still had endless stamina, who knew what kind of monster would emerge from the insect nest? It was still better to be careful and keep his strength at a high level. Naturally, no one expressed disagreement with Huo Furong's arrangements. The threat of the winged insects was something that they had all seen. Moreover, Ling Han had also killed countless multi-legged insects and horned insects. The remaining 2 winged insects both showed hints of fear. They seemed to still possess survival instinct, and treasured their lives more. They both flapped their wings, and retreated behind the lines. They attacked only when they had reached a farther location. In this manner, the threat they posed had become considerably smaller. Everyone was holding on strongly, but there seemed to be no end to the sea of insects. No matter how much blood pooled on the ground from the insects they killed, they were still endless. "This isn't a good way." Everyone's expression changed. They could still hold on, but the situation was becoming worse. That was because there was more and more poison collecting in their bodies. The effects on their battle prowess was also becoming greater. "Hold on!" Jiao Lan's hands formed a strange sign. Shio, a shadow, suddenly flew out of her body and floated into the depths of the insect cave. It was visible, but wasn't actually solid. A great many insects were clearly attacking it, yet it seemed like it did not exist. "Divine shadow skill?" Huo Furong nodded. "This is the best technique for scouting enemies. Even if they discover it, they can do nothing to stop it. It has form but is not solid, like a shadow doppelganger that the heaven and earth has taken form in." After a while, Jiao Lan's figure trembled, and she suddenly snapped her eyes open. Her expression was filled with shock. "There is an insect queen that is endlessly laying eggs, so fast that it is no slower than us killing them." Everyone was stunned. No wonder these insects couldn't be killed completely no matter how hard the group killed them. That was because there was an insect queen that was laying eggs at a shocking rate. "In other words, there's no way that we can completely kill all these insects," Ji Wuming said grimly. "There's only one solution," Huo Furong continued. Ling Han nodded. "We need to kill the insect queen." But just how difficult would it be to kill the insect queen? They needed to go against the flow, charge right towards that insect queen, and only then would they have a chance to make their move. It was something that could be explained easily with a few words, but to actually do it? Everyone looked at the insects that were flooding towards them from all directions like seawater, and felt a sense of helplessness rise up in their hearts. Fuck, this was too hard. This is our only way out. We have to do it. But they were all monarch stars, and had willpower that could not be matched. Immediately, they firmed their resolve. Die. No longer did they choose the strategy of half their members resting while the other half stayed on defense. Instead, they moved out all at once, going against the flow of the sea of insects. This was really too hard. The sea of insects was endless. Every step forwards required a bloody battle, expending an astonishing amount of energy. At this moment, who else would dare to hold anything back? They all used powerful moves. Divine light shone blindingly as they forcefully boosted themselves to celestial king tier battle prowess. This allowed them to become unmatched. Pung, 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 it was as if they were an invincible spear, piercing through the waves and forging onwards while charging towards the innermost depths of the insect cave. Meanwhile, Ling Han weighed the heaven and earth origin stars in his hand. They had always been just a weapon to serve as an intimidation tactic. By the look of things, today was the day that they would finally show their might. They charged once more into the insect cave. Instantly, space enlarged countless folds over, with attacks rushing towards them from all directions. "Where is the insect queen?" everyone asked. This place was enshrouded in darkness, and they couldn't see very far at all. Jialan pointed at that mountain peak ahead of them. "Where exactly?" everyone asked hurriedly. They, too, could guess that the insect queen was on the mountain, but they needed to know a more exact position. Otherwise, how were they supposed to kill it? Jiao Lan's expression was a little astounded. He was still pointing at the mountain and said, "That is the insect queen." Everyone faltered at first, then realization dawned on them, and they all inhaled sharply. The mountain that they had seen was actually not a real mountain, but the insect queen itself. No wonder its rate of laying eggs was actually capable of catching up with the rate at which they killed the insects. It was around the size of a mountain, so it was definitely very fertile. Just how were they supposed to kill such a massive monster? Where were its vital points? Chapter 2451 Killing the Leader. Chapter 2451 Killing the Leader. "Ling Han, the two of us will join forces, and we will kill this insect queen together," Huo Furong said. In this place, only Ling Han was barely qualified to be her equal. The others were all too weak, and even Ji Wuming was slightly inferior to her. Ling Han nodded. Without getting rid of the insect queen, they couldn't even think of surviving. "Let's go!" The two of them leaped out of the battle circle at the same time, charging towards that mountain. The two of them should be the strongest elites below the Celestial King tier at present. Even in a high-level dimension, it was probable that not many that were their equals could be found. The might of their combined forces was incredibly powerful. Like a hot knife through butter, they charged to the foot of the mountain. They had to do it in a single try. Otherwise, if their progress was impeded, they would perhaps be unable to advance any further. The two great elites had unleashed all their power, and it was unknown how many insects they had killed on their way when they finally charged to the foot of the mountain. Even Huo Furong had used a celestial tool. It was a mirror, and with a sweep of its blazing light, a multitude of insects would die in the aftermath. It was not just simply forged from divine metal, but had rather been forged into a celestial tool at the very least. It was a true pseudo-celestial tool, possessing extraordinary might. Meanwhile, Ling Han was wielding the divine demon sword. The success or failure of killing the insect queen implicated all of their lives. Thus, it was necessary that the two of them could unleash their greatest battle prowess possible. Reaching here, they could finally see the details. There was actually a pipe stretching downwards from the mountain, and this pipe was constantly wriggling. Every time it twisted, an insect larva would be birthed, and multi-legged insects would immediately come forwards to move it away. There were still a considerable number of these pipes. Though Ling Han and Huo Furong could not see too far, they had discovered 8 other such pipes on either side of them, and they were madly laying eggs. "This is the insect queen's behind, so the head should be above. We'll charge upwards, and destroy its mind." The two of them exchanged their views. This insect queen had to have some special ability to communicate with all the insects, commanding them to attack. Based on the protection of the winged insects, the insect queen's intelligence was very extraordinary. They guessed that this swarm of insects should be akin to a beehive. The queen bee had a massive body, but did not have much mobility. It could only eat and lay eggs. In comparison, the insect queen here should have very strong spiritual power. "Be careful," the two of them said to each other. A strong spiritual power meant that it was strong in the use of regulations as well. This insect queen might not be very mobile, but her battle prowess definitely could not be underestimated. They charged towards the summit. These insects seemed to have gone mad as they rushed towards the duo. One incredibly terrifying attack after another swept towards them. Pun pun pun. A lot of these attacks landed on the mountain, but the mountain was still immobile. It was like it really was an immobile divine mountain. Ling Han and Huo Furong exchanged a look, and could see the surprise in each other's eyes. This defense was really too frightening, wasn't it? Despite being barraged by thousands of attacks, it still did not budge in the slightest. Previously, Ling Han had been wondering why these insects were not cautious at all. Weren't they afraid that these attacks would destroy the insect queen as well? Their intelligence was indeed as low as rock bottom. But facts had proven that while it was true that the insect queen was not very mobile, the toughness of her outer shell had reached a chilling level. How were they supposed to kill it then? "The mouth part!" both exclaimed at the same time. To continuously lay eggs, it would definitely take a lot of energy as well. It would have to continuously eat. Then, they could penetrate its mouthpart, and attack its mind directly, and they were sure that its internal organs couldn't be as hard as this. The two of them raced towards the mountain, but the troops of insects were attacking them like mad, and even those winged insects were spitting out arrows from a close distance in the air, with absolutely no regard for their own lives. This caused a very great problem for Ling Han and Huo Furong. "I'll block them, you go!" Huo Furong's expression was filled with killing intent. At this time, it was like she had turned into a demon. Boom! Frightening flames surged from her body, extending her limbs continuously. As she swept out a palm, the flames took the form of a dragon which swooped out. The insects were dying by the masses, falling from the mountain. In this instant, Huo Furong was fully showing her battle prowess that exceeded the line of the celestial king tier. Ling Han took a deep breath. Regulations of space activated, and he teleported towards the summit. Because he couldn't see too far, he did not dare teleport too far either. Who knew what kind of hellish place he would crash into in a moment of carelessness? He continuously activated small-range teleportation, rushing rapidly towards the mountain. From afar, he could only see the rough shape. Now, he could see more and more details. This mountain was indeed unusual. It was not covered with mountain rocks, but was rather covered with the veins of an insect shell. Ling Han sent out a casual sword strike, and then looked astonished. Even with the sharpness of the divine demon's sword, it just left behind a mark that was around half a foot deep in it, but not the slightest bit of blood dripped out. Who knew just how thick this outer shell had to be? That was right. The divine demon's sword was completely capable of digging into the shell of this insect queen, but this needed time. The problem was, where would he get this time from? In the distance, though Huo Furong was still unleashing her might, impeding a great number of insects, a considerable number had still circled around and came over. Among them were two winged insects. These things released sneaky arrows, which could not be guarded against. Ling Han did not pause, and still charged towards the mountain as per the original plan. No matter what, this insect queen had to have a weakness. With his repeated teleportation, the summit was finally within sight. However, Ling Han immediately felt a strong sense of danger. Two insects that he had never seen before had appeared soundlessly. Their size was very large, reaching 30 meters in length. They were like mantises, with two incredibly massive pincers. It was like they were two celestial tools, exuding a dim light. Though the light wasn't very strong, it was still very terrifying. Ling Han's heart clenched. This should be the last line of defense for the insect queen. Furthermore, there were very few of them. This meant that their strength would definitely be even more powerful. He did not waste his words at all. There was nothing he wanted to communicate with these insects. Wielding the sword, he charged out. The divine demon sword shone brilliantly, its sword chi soaring to the 9 heavens. The 2 giant insects used their pincers to shield themselves. Pu. When the sword chi landed, it left behind a very long mark on their pincers, but after the sword chi completed its course, these pincers were slowly recovering. Though it wasn't very fast, the wound left behind by the sword chi wasn't very deep, either, and they could still be recovered very soon. Ling Han had no intention to tarry any further with these 2 giant insects. With a leap, he directly charged over. Shwa, the 2 great insects opened their mouths at the same time, spitting out a dim light. It was extraordinarily fast, and caught up with him in an instant. Ling Han could only withdraw his sword and deliver a counter. When the divine demon sword landed, the dim light immediately exploded, turning into a terrifying shock wave. His figure trembled, and he was involuntarily sent flying outwards. At first, Ling Han had thought that the attacks of these 2 great insects were more inclined towards corrosion. He had not expected that they would be filled with explosive power, and had directly thrown him outwards. He hurriedly somersaulted a few times, tapping repeatedly with both feet as he charged back towards the mountain. The 2 great insects assailed him, brandishing their twin pincers, and countless insects were charging over beneath them. There were also winged insects that were launching sneak attacks from the air. The pressure was as heavy as a mountain. How was he supposed to get out of this crisis? Ling Han shouted loudly. Pun! The sound turned into a flood wave that barreled towards the 2 giant insects. The divine demon sword was twirling in circles, slicing through all the sneaky arrows fired from the winged insects. Now, he definitely could not be stopped. Otherwise, when the sea of insects flooded towards him, he would really be done for, and all of them would be finished as well. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.